Hello, everyone. Hello. We are back here live once again. We have some things to go over here. What's going on, Helsman? Hello, good to see you. Hi, Champ. Hello, Coder. Everyone say hi, Coder. Hello, Kevin. What's going on, Choice CJ? Good to see you. Champ is here. Thank you so much. What's going on, Words? Bro, sleep. Another go. You gotta go to sleep. Go live another time. I would love to. In fact, I was trying to stream 2 hours ago, but I had something I had to do. Got caught up with some stuff, and of course we had to get prepped for tonight, for this stream specifically. What's going on, Q? Hello, good to see you. And hey, X, I had an excellent time playing against you instead of Swiss earlier too. I think I heard that you bubbled, which was unfortunate, but hey, congratulations even still then. I was right there last tournament, so I'm with you. Oh, well. Champions don't sleep? Absolutely not. We're sitting here living a thing. What's going on, Tyler? Hello, by the way. And thank you so much for running an excellent event a couple days ago. Ninth hurt so much. I feel you. Quite literally, right there. All right, everyone. Let's talk about some stuff today. So, welcome back to another lecture series from Professor Swolax. I'm not quite your professor yet. We still are a little bit business casual, but we'll get right into it soon. Today we have a few things to talk about. Number one, we have to talk about the past tournament. What happened? What's going on? 2, we have to talk about the current meta. Of course, we have to analyze some decks. We have to go over some thoughts and thinking of what to do in Elestrals right now, what has been some trends and some things that you guys should be looking out for. 3, I just counted 2 twice. That's how 2 works. 3, today's lecture series is a little bit different. We're gonna be talking about effectively how to win at Elestrals at all, if any, if you guys ever are curious on how to do that. Yeah, again, we are a little bit late today, so thank you guys so much for being here at the time that you guys are. We're going to go live about 2 hours before, but I decided to stream now because I thought it would be the perfect time to, and definitely not because I was caught up on other things. In fact, I had a date tonight, and he was very handsome. So hot. So, well, triggering people to get in. It's going Dias. Hello, good to see you. Solar's strongest soldier. Hey, listen. I almost picked Solar for the past weekend. It was crazy. I love it. Dub Air. It's going Keebs. Hello, good to see you. It's awesome. Yeah. Oh, I know that one. Can opponent with a 7 to win game? That's what I'm saying. With a swift jab to the head. That's kind of how that works, right? Exactly. Let's go, Owen. Hello. Good to see you. It's the Creep Bro. Oh, the GOAT. The GOAT is here. What's going on, champ? Former champion yourself. Hello. Champ. Real recognize real. All right, everyone. When you're ready to get into this, we can get into this as well. We can start with the lecture series. So, you know, whenever we're ready, we can easily get into it. Let me know if the music's too loud, if it's too quiet. Let me know how I sound a little bit, getting things tested up and good to go. Did Josh ever go over his cows list? I want to try that. We can go over that tonight. We can go over some considerations that I had for deck building today. What's going on, Hello, I was a round 4 opponent. Oh, okay, cool. Hi, hello. Good to see you again. And also, I had a great time playing you. I'm a big Wind believer, and I think Wind is an excellent choice for this meta, and I'll go over a few of the reasons why that is. But we'll do that. So hello everyone, I'm your professor for tonight. Hopefully class, you do have some good note-taking skills. We do have a little bit to discuss and talk about, so hopefully you are ready to go. And without further ado, I'll get into my little persona here. What's going on, Lazy Lee? Hello, good to see you. My goat. Hey, real recognize real. That's my goat right there, ball up top. Cow deck, very curious since we're working on a Solar Foretell list. It's a work in progress, but I do think Solar unironically is a great choice. A great choice. So let me move on to the lecture series of today. We're going to talk about one thing and one thing only, and that is, here we go, it worked out. How to win at Elestrals. This is actually really funny to talk about because, oh my god, I just messed up my OBS layout. Okay, fixed it. Whoop. Because I think, and funny enough, we have an absolute metric ton that we can go over in this. And that could be from a lot of things, right? We could talk about how to win at Elestrals, how to win at card games, how to win anything really. But so this lecture series is going to be covering a few different topics. One, the mindset of how to think about Elestrals or how to think about playing games or skill-based anything effectively. The other portion of this lecture is going to be talking about and discussing specifically inside of deck builders and card games, how to think about your deck and your play, etc. And the other part of it too is going to be a little more generic knowledge in terms of your champion mindset. You know, it's the championship difference really. Let me fix my hair real quick. While I am excited to be here, I'm also a little nervous to reveal all the secrets that it takes to become an Elestral champion. So, whenever you guys are ready, we can get into it. Everyone leave a like. Gotta like the stream and maybe something cool happen at the end. So, like I said, this stream is going to be covering two topics. The first is going to be competitive Elestrals, how to win at Elestrals, things to consider, how to go about certain aspects of the game, specifically how I think about them and kind of imparting that wisdom onto you. The other portion of the stream is going to be talking about is going to be talking about the current meta, the current decks, and we're going to be utilizing the tools that we go over inside of the first lecture series to apply the knowledge and kind of evaluate as we go. Again, I have the top 8 decks broken down and I've looked at them pretty well, and we're going to talk about them extensively. So that is going to be the yap sesh for today. If you guys are in for a quick 20-minute lecture, then absolutely. What's going on, True Nerdgasm? Hello, good to see you. My Shadow Stars came in today, you pulled a Draking. Let's go! That's huge. The 1 of 10 Draking. That's awesome. That's good to hear. Excellent, excellent. All right, finally a lecture shorter than 7 hours. I know this is gonna be super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Okay, let's talk about it real quick. All right, ready? How to win at Elestrals. So first things first, let's go over the one thing that we always do, which is who am I? Why should you be listening? And who are you watching yap on the screen? That's me. Hello, I'm Swolax. Unfortunately, I have a copious amount of UX and UI design. Once again, very unfortunate, which means that we're going to be approaching this discussion from a design standpoint and from user experience, particularly as well inside of performance and inside of sports performance and sports psychology. I think that's a particular subsect of my study that I think I can apply here. And obviously, it kind of worked out. But that being said, I'm also your current Elestrals champion, winning the most recent tournament. So that might be dethroned here in about 13 days when we get the next, I think, app tournament is what it is. But for now, I'm your current Elestrals champion. I'm a 2-time champion, 1 for Frostfall and 1 for Daybreak. So pretty neat, right? If I had a nickel for every single time that I've won an Elestrals tournament, I'd have 2 nickels. And you guys would also have $1 billion for every time I use that joke. Now, I do have other tops. That's not only just, the champion here. I also have a few top 8s and a few top 4s that we've done, and I'm pretty happy about that. I like long walks, and roses are my favorite flowers, and that's all you really need to know. Overall, pretty cool guy. Did my stream cut out? Did something happen? There was something crazy? Hello? Okay. Anyways. Point is, small F, but we good? What the hell happened? Something's going on with my internet, guys. I just want to say. Anyways, to recap, current Elestrals champion, about to be dethroned, I top. All right, next. Important context here. Because I was not always your Elestrals champion, I did, in my first ever Elestrals tournament, go 0-5. And that's important to note. Professor, I'm sorry for being late. I was too busy with the Earthseer in my nightmares. JT, the goat T. What's going on? Hello, everyone. Say hello, JT. Hello, hello. Welcome to class. And absolutely, it's totally fine. The bears are a valid excuse for missing class or being late to class. Absolutely. Can't remember that tournament. Who won? I don't know. It's history at this point. That being said, I did go 0-5 inside the first tournament, so I know a thing or two about losing. In fact, this tweet that you see here on the side, I'm sorry, Unk. I'm sorry, Chapel. You will be avenged. This tweet was whenever I bubbled the first Daybreak tournament and not getting top 8. I was so close to victory and just a few more things inside of my control, and I'm sure I could have pulled out maybe even a win. But we will never know. So when I say that bubbling is perfectly valid and things that just kind of happen, it can happen and it can feel bad. So trust me when I say things get better. You can become a champion. You might come from humble beginnings. Look how dorky I look. This is me now. This is me then. Anyways, this tournament bracket that you're looking before you is the most recent webcam tournament results where I ended up taking it. And the picture on the left of that is me at homecoming in 2013, I think, or 2014. Regardless, that is to say, things get better. Boop. Oh, and this one's also just a funny one too. This is about a year after that. I look older in this picture than I do here, but both are dorky and both are in themselves emblematic of things get better. Look at this style. I just wanted to pull this out because holy God, does this look rough. Look at that belt. Remember, guys, remember those belts that had like the double loop cinch thing? Like, what am I wearing here? What's this hairstyle? That's ridiculous. This is crazy. This is crazy. Isn't that nuts? Swag? Absolutely not. But also, that was about the time period where swag was being used. So you dress like someone who got their first job at a country club busboy. True. Abercrombie shirt and Hollister jeans. I know your name. I'm saying, right? Looks very Canadian. This is about your 2010s affair. Your standard 2010s. I'm a guy, I don't know how to dress myself. Look, Steeler girl lax. Yeah, probably. Again, it got better. It got better, but it's gonna get worse before it gets better. You know? Anyways, I just thought this was a funny inclusion in here. And that way we can also take it not so seriously. Okay, so moving on. We are at step 0 currently inside of your eventual winning of an Elestrals tournament, or any tournament, really. Step 0 is the most important portion of this. This is all of your pre-work. And honestly, a lot of the stuff you can do right now while watching this stream. I wouldn't, because there's a test after this, so please pay attention. But that being said, we are at the precipice of the most important question. Now, any guesses to what that question might be? This is a kind of a trick question in itself, because clearly I could write anything on this next slide and you guys, I could just completely tell you guys no. But if you have been any sort of competitive in anything, then you might actually know what it is. How not to bubble out? That might be an important question, but probably not here. But that being said, again, there ain't no shame in bubbling, but not quite. How to draw triple ambrosia. That is actually the thing we're gonna be learning today. The most important thing to do inside of Elestrals is drawing doubles and triples ambrosias. Absolutely. All right, I'll give you one more guess, chat, and then we can actually reveal what the most important question to this topic is. You might make it a good one. Again, I want to give out as many gold stars here as possible. Last time y'all were really on it. Why do we want to win? Close. That's actually pretty close. Holy, wait a minute. That's actually a really good one. All right. That's pretty good, actually. Can I possibly do this? That is actually a really good, it's pretty close. I'll give a gold star to Helmsman. The answer obviously is in the title of the slide. It's yes, you can. But the big thing you must ask yourself before really doing anything, but particularly inside of competitive card games, competitive Elestrals, competitive Melee, fighting games, I don't know, if you're wanting to just be the best that you can be. Again, this goes back into like the sports psychology section, is you have to ask yourself legitimately and honestly, can you do this? Are you the best equipped to handle the situation right now? And if you are not, can you become the best person in that situation? Can you become the best equipped person? Maybe. Maybe you can. I say yes, and yes, you can. Obviously, right? You got this. You might think to yourself, you don't have it, but trust me, you do. And even if you decide it's not for you to go full sail, that's okay. It's not for everyone. And just like your real professors, I have dorky references to late night sitcoms in the form of GIF form on these slides. So be prepared for that. But the most important thing here, again, is that the question you must ask yourself before deep diving into this life. And it's that scene from another sitcom reference from Malcolm in the Middle. You know, Hal turns and he's like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And that's the thing you have to ask yourself, truthfully and honestly. Boop. You got this. Easy peasy. And that's true. Do you play Melee? What's going on, Dan? Hello, good to see you. I do play Melee. I was once PR'd inside of my local scene here in Dallas. So I'm not too shabby. But the professor's a little bit rusty there. In fact, I've been divulging a lot of my mental and physical time to Elestrals. So, anyways, the point is you must ask yourself first and foremost, can you do this? To me, I think you can. However, if you don't, completely okay. That's completely okay. Let me change the music here a little bit. I think I need to go into something here. Yeah, that's good. Perfect. Okay, moving on. Like I said, I believe in you, and you need to believe in yourself. First and foremost. Most important thing. If you don't, none of this other stuff matters. So sit there and think to yourself, do I want to do this? How can I do this? And what's my goal here? And ultimately, you do got this. You can do this. And your goal is really just up to you. Okay. So, you've decided to take the plunge. You've decided to say, yes, I want to go further. I want to be a champion. I want to win at Elestrals, at card games, something competitive. Again, I'm going to talk about Elestrals here as the framework, but kind of apply these lessons elsewhere. That's kind of the important portion of these Professor Swolak's lectures, is that they're transferable to everything. Kind of. That being said, so you've chosen to dive off the deep end, to ruin your life forever by becoming a champion. Okay, that's awesome. Boop. You have now moved on to step 1, picking a top tier. It just is that simple. And it is really funny to say that this is the next slide that pops up after all this inspirational talk of being like, you know, you got this, you can do it. It's all the mindset. Ask yourself these questions. But the real answer is you have to pick a top tier. Just pick a top tier. Classic FGC clip. Just pick a top tier. That's not always the case. We'll talk about really what this means. It's more of a satirical slide here. But the point is you have to pick a deck. You decide to become a Elestrals champion. Let's start somewhere. Let's choose a deck. Boop. Now, these are some things to think about when you're picking a deck. All right. Now, your mind is a terrible thing to waste, so you should be thinking a lot here. We're going to preface before we deep dive into our deck choices, our card choices, etc., what to actually pick inside of Elestrals to play. Here's some things you should be thinking about. Your deck choice, the cards within that deck, and the current decks that are inside of the meta, maybe even the certain players that are playing those decks, right? This kind of comes up a little bit when talking about like a little more of like a meta analysis, which is hard to do sometimes. So obviously, you know, we have a lot of people that do that legwork for you and just kind of wrap their heads around certain things and how to think about the meta. But the important part is if you guys want to do it yourself, again, you can start here. Think about your deck choice. Think about the cards within the deck. Why are you playing each card? And think about what you could be playing against, as well as what maybe could be the future of the meta, etc. Rambling. The point is that you should be spending more time thinking about your choices than actually playing. And that sounds kind of counterintuitive, right? Like if I'm going to become a champion, obviously, I need to play the game that I'm thinking about, right? Yeah, that's obviously very true. I'm not saying don't play. But the point is that most of your time inside of Elestrals, or most of your time inside of every single game, is reviewing, evaluation, thinking to yourself about, I don't know, everything, really. From the top down, there's so many small, minute things to actually go over and review. But at the end of the day, you can kind of break down to some small things and some baby steps first. And again, most of this is mindset. About 80 to 90% of it is what you're thinking. I have this joke that in my day-to-day work, in my 9 to 5, that I say, my job's theoretical. Now, that's obviously to kind of pass off my responsibilities and to say that I'm not really doing a whole lot. But the reality is that it kind of just takes a certain type of thinking to process and problem solve. And that's kind of the first portion that you have to kind of be okay with, is that you just need to be able to think, right? Like, how do you think? And learning how to think. That's the first step. It really is. When I say pick a top tier, this is kind of a cutesy way to introduce this topic because effectively we're just trying to get you to start thinking. Think about your choices in this game before you even start playing, because that's when the choices are effectively final. And that's when the real test actually starts. So, let's talk about deck choices real quick in Elestrals, and we'll go over the most recent tournaments. This is the total event breakdown from this past weekend. We'll kind of tie these sort of portions of the lecture into each other, but the idea is that there's a lot of decks to pick from. Like, look at the diversity of this current meta. This is post the ban list where Lavalith, Earthquake, and Laurels are now limited, and now Jotaya is banned, so no more FTK, which is great. The point is that we have a lot to consider when it comes to what deck to play. Again, there's tons of them on here. Solar, Earth Beaters, Race the Top Thunder. Draking had a super high representation inside this tournament, but unfortunately none of them converted. Rhino Sect, Tempest, Morfrost, Chronodile. Again, these are all kind of cutesy names to really kind of go over, like, you know, effectively element decks, which is what I've broken them down into. So this is your top 8 finish from the last tournament. I've simplified it down. I'm reducing these decks down to effectively their bare minimum, but ultimately these strategies, even within the actual decks themselves, which we'll go over here in a little bit, play vastly different to each other, right? So the 3 Topping Thunder list, the 3 Frost list, the 1 Bears list, and the 1 Big Body Casting, which is effectively Big Body Beatdown, but we're changing the name to BBC. But the general idea here is that you can take a look at this chart, and even if this isn't the top 8 chart, you can break this down into a little more of a simple option, right? We effectively have 1, 2, 3, 4 different deck types here, and then we have some micro decisions inside of each deck type that inform how that play works. But there's commonalities between them enough to where I'm just going to group them here together. So going back to picking a top tier. First things first, you gotta just pick one. Whether you look at a pie chart like this and you say, ooh, what's Chronodile? Crocodilo. And you want to play the funny crocodile. Whether you look at the top 8 breakdown and you say, ooh, I love bears. Let's play bears. Great. That's a great first start, but you have to just start somewhere. Pick a deck. Pick a top tier. It's just that easy. The cards and the decks that are doing well inside the meta are there for a reason. So even if you don't necessarily want to put in a lot of the legwork to do some evaluations, to do some analysis, just pick that first, and maybe you can learn later, right? But the point is to be a little more mindful, to think about your decision in choosing that strategy and that deck. Now, you might say that comes from actually playing the game, which we'll get into here in a little bit in terms of when that actually happens and as far as when you'll be picking up and dropping cards and yada, yada, yada. But the general gist of it is pick something, right? Elestral's Destruction is when you skip the game entirely and just threaten your opponent with a bomb, right? Absolutely, yeah. Thinking, I'm cooked. No, absolutely. Space Pope, you got this. You missed the first couple slides. Believe in yourself. You're all here, which means you are obviously people who think. And if you're not here, oh well. That being said, how to choose the love of your life. So we talked about effectively just picking a deck, right? But maybe you're like, I'm just not going to copy it card for card. I'm not going to deck. I want to actually think about this a little further. And congratulations, that's the first step, is thinking. But how do you choose the love of your life? The deck that's going to take you to the top? Well, think about it like this. Think about the deck itself. Again, we talked about the actual different categorizations of the decks and what they are trying to accomplish in terms of their win con. That's a great way to think about it. Or you can think about it like the element, like we would here inside of the Elestrals webcam tournament top 8. And the important portion is just to think. Again, I'm going to repeat this a few times. You guys might get tired of it, but think, class, think. It's crazy. Anyways, what do you consider when picking a deck? Okay, this is an important question to think about. Now, some people, I think, start off with like, oh, this card's really cool. And that's a great first portion. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think oftentimes what you see is that people ultimately will stop there. They'll stop at the feel, the look, the design, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, it's more sitcom references. There's nothing wrong with that, you know? But the reality of it is that you should be able to be a deck chameleon, taking different decks and different types of decks into different games is very important for becoming a more well-rounded player. And so even if you don't necessarily like the design of the actual Elestrals themselves, the actual cards inside the pool, that's completely okay. But sometimes you got to do it. In short, play good decks, kill your darlings. Kind of, right? Like, I think that's the larger consideration here, is that sometimes you will have to come up against card cool, and card is pretty, and card is cute. And sometimes those things can be very strong. They can be very good inside of a given meta, or be very positively, strong. But yes, learn how to kill your darlings. That gets into a little bit of the mindset stuff and some things we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But overall, yes. Now, maybe you don't know how to address or think of picking a strategy, right? Main lesson, don't play Cryspore, or do. That's the neat part. You can if you want to, but it takes a little bit of evaluation and a little bit of thought to actually, kind of justify it, at least to me. Now, when considering a deck, what are some things you should generally think about? Obviously, things like the strengths and weaknesses. Now, again, a lot of people stop here, even at like the level 2, the iceberg of the Elestrals or card game or fighting game meta, so to speak, is that some people say, well, my deck has a lot of strengths and a lot of weaknesses, but they don't really go any further than that, right? They say, oh, I lose to this. Oh, I win against this. And like it's a matchup-based spread, which is not all the way there. That's a good portion of it, but it's not quite there yet. And in fact, these other things to consider kind of help with that as well, and analyzing those strengths and weaknesses specifically to get a more well-rounded, objective thought on that, which is the coverage. Does your deck have coverage for different matchups, for different cards, for your own play even? Like, does it actually cover how you want to play? Cool. How easy is it to play? The ease of play. Is it a very forgiving deck? Is it a very punishing deck? Right? Because that's also going to matter, and also might influence how the deck stacks up against other decks on here. I bring up the good example that Solar is a very technical strategy, and it's very impressive to see Solar players do well. However, because of that, it's not a very forgiving deck, and you can very easily have the game slip away from you if you aren't just playing out of your mind. You aren't just playing crazy, right? So think about that just a little bit, right? How not easy is it to pilot, because sometimes that is very fair, but is the deck forgiving? Can you actively make decisions that are leading you to more wins, et cetera, et cetera? And maybe it's just too difficult for some people to wrap their heads around, and that's okay. But because of that, you might have to skip some cards too. So it's not just killing your darlings, but also recognizing that if you have a deck that is like uber strong, but you just don't get it, that's okay. And then lastly, something to consider as well, and again, these are all just suggestions, is the card pool. Now, I'm saying card pool, but not card pool as like a whole, even though that's something you really should be looking at. It's card pool in terms of the actual element or deck. What does the actual deck have at its disposal to allow you to progress and to win and to take advantage of the situation? That's very important to consider. Again, card pool overall is good to know, but specifically within a deck and within an element, it's important to know and to see what tools you have available to you. So these are all things to consider when picking and playing a strategy, right? These strengths and weaknesses, what does the deck cover? Is it easy to play? And, what does it play? Moving on from this, we can talk about a specific example in the form of like water here. So I use examples of stuff like Galaxy, Smoltuga, and Eddy. And we have some general rules for deck considerations, and specifically Elestrals, things like their strength, how big are they? Can they actively be a board presence? Are they a threat on the board? Is the deck consistent at all? Does it have ways to accomplish its win condition and gain advantage? As well, Spirit Math. This is again Elestral specific, but the idea here is a deck like Water has native recovery, which is super important, I think. But is that easy to play around? Is that easy to play with? Decks that have a lot of different varied spirit types and have a lot of different like management to do can sometimes be a very hard thing, and also can sometimes conflict with what the deck wants at all. And again, we go back to coverage. Does the deck have good Elestral removal? Does it have good back row and rune removal? And those are things that either they're native to the archetype, the element, the deck, or you have to splash in. And again, I think if they aren't necessarily immediately available inside the element or the strategy, then that starts to conflict with the spirit math portion and something, again, to consider. These are all just considerations. There's not really like a fine line here, like a rule, like a true rule, but these are just kind of generalities to think about. Again, going back to this is that this is more of a like thing to think about and some questions here, but this is specific to Elestrals in terms of what you should be thinking about with your deck, right? And the last thing too on this, and this is probably arguably the most important thing, is how do those cards play into the apps? You know, are they, how will your opponents be able to play around these cards? And are these cards hard to play around, or are they really easy to punish? That's a big consideration as well, you know? So, what's going on, Wubo? Hello, I was late to the presentation, sorry, sir. Absolutely no problems at all. We are in the middle of it. We effectively just started. We're still on step 1, which is pick a top tier. But step 0 was a mindset thing, so you have to go back and take notes on that later. So, all this is to say that these are small things, and they might seem like no duh things. That's the crazy part about this lecture specifically, is that one thing about this specific topic is that a lot of these things are very straightforward, but you'd be surprised at how many people just don't do it. A lot of people just go into things and go into Elestrals just mindless, right? Isn't that crazy? And the point is to be a little more mindful, very demure, very mindful. And that's, to me, important, at least, because you should be, especially if you're looking to be competitive at all, or, you know, winning, etc. That's more of a personal and mental thing. Again, these are mostly mental notes at the moment. We're not even getting into the technical play side of things, but the idea here is just to think about all these things, have these things be considerations, and try to have as much thought into this as possible. You know, just be a thought real quick. Anyways, moving on. Let's do some quick evaluations just to kind of see what it all looks like, right? On a specific card level, right? Just to kind of think about this a little bit. And again, this is kind of just to teach you to be mindful about cards. Like, I can show this on screen. You can say, well, what is strength? What is consistency? What is spirit math? What is coverage? Those things are also somewhat subjective in terms of the given format and how they would go into things, right? The point is, though, is that you want to be able to evaluate cards in a strategy outside of just like their general typing, right? Like you need to be able to do it individually and also holistically. So let's give some examples and kind of some things to look at when looking at cards. Let's talk about Edward. Eddie is a very strong Elestral, in my opinion, and I think it is because of these reasons here. So when you're evaluating an Elestral, think about their strengths and weaknesses, pros and cons. It's so easy and fundamental to do. And I truly do believe that everyone is capable of doing this, whether you have to actually make a list yourself or just kind of make some mental notes, right? And this will also affect your moment-to-moment play in a match, right? Thinking about what these cards are good into, which are effectively their outs, right? How do you counter their counters? And then maybe their weaknesses. How will my card that I'm playing affect the state? And are those weaknesses gonna come up? And they will, trust me. So again, being considerate, being mindful, it's important. And learning how to do that is hard, but it just takes time. So let's do some practice. Edward. What are some strengths of Eddie? Well, it's good into PTA. It's good into Tsunami. It's good into Shield. Now, why is that? When you think about this a little bit deeper, the effect of Eddie is when you cast this Eddie, you can change the position of an Elestral. When a player casts Rock in a hard place, you can special send this Eddie into a Kerbis from your hand or deck. Now, the secondary effect of the special sending is pretty decent, right? But we're going to be talking about the more common use case, which is its first effect of changing Elestral's position. Now, it's non-targeting, which means your opponent does have to respond almost immediately, meaning that you can take advantage of situations where your opponent has multiple Elestrals. Eddie's not good into PTA? Completely disagree. And I'll explain why here in a moment. Now, Eddie is a 4/1 stat, which is a relatively beefy body. It's not the biggest thing in the world, as you can see in one of the weaknesses, that Eddie is a little bit small, but overall that just kind of overall, that just kind of doesn't matter for a lot of the card pool, as most Elestrals either have a strong attack or strong defense. Now, some of them do have a good balance stat for both, but Eddie should be able to help cover a little bit of that. That's kind of the point of Eddie. So let's go over it real quick too. Okay, so good into PTA, Tsunami, and Shield. Now, when I'm evaluating this card and I say that, here's my reasoning why. Your common positions that you'll be even playing Eddie into are things like an Astro Rabbit or a thing into, let's say, a card you have to out, right? The thing is that with PTA, typically, it'll decrease its attack by 2. The most common scenario that you're going to run Eddie into, which is the Astro Rabbit flip effect into Crash, is you're still accomplishing its goal of outing the Astro Rabbit and placing and removal of the Elestral. You're crashing with it at a 2, plus you've now also wasted your opponent's PTA. That to me, that sounds pretty good into PTA as a whole. Not to mention, and how I like to play Eddie, and how I think I've seen a few people play Eddie as well, you're utilizing it with things like Divine Runes, like Zeus, for example, which typically means that even that PTA comes down, you can easily play around it by having a Zeus on the field to complement Eddie's small attack at that point. Meaning that you can effectively ensure that Eddie and whatever small Elestrals that you have on the board can still hit over those larger stats. That's particularly why PTA is still good here. Again, it's more about more common scenarios that you'd run into. Sure, Eddie into PTA is not great because it does decrease its attack by half, which is still significant. But again, when thinking about the most common use cases for this card, that PTA does not hurt as much, in my opinion. But again, the card evaluation is somewhat subjective as well, so that's kind of rough too. Yeah, exactly. It also usually requires an immediate response, so baiting PTA and taking a 1-for-2 trade is not terrible. That's a great evaluation, in my opinion. Now, same thing into Tsunami. It's water, so it's immediately Tsunami immune, meaning that it will more than likely still connect, meaning that your opponent has only PTA, Shield, and Gorgons to respond to it. And typically it will demand a response. I think Shield could be in the okay category for Eddie itself, but I think that Shield is actually pretty good into because, and as we can see from one of the weaknesses of Eddie, it's a one-time use. But Shield allows Eddie to go back to the hand, threaten on the next turn, and kind of alleviate this weakness of the one-time use, having it be a multiple turn threat, right? Same idea with the 5s, but with a little more utility. Now, I do think Eddie is just okay into Gorgon's Gaze. This counter rune negates the effect of Eddie, and oftentimes what will happen is that the Eddie change effect will happen, your opponent will go to combat, and you can even just stop the Eddie from attacking anyway. So it's a little bit rough because you're having to also commit to combat, and in addition, because you don't get, back to the weakness, is a one-time use. It's hard to say that Eddie's going to get continued value other than maybe that it's a 4 body, so it can hit or trade with certain things. Again, the more that Eddie sticks on the board, the more moment-to-moment evaluation you'll have to do, which means that if it sticks and it doesn't get its immediate benefit and it gets countered with a Gorgons, it does have some diminishing returns. So that's why I'd say it's okay into Gorgons, but I still think that's a somewhat positive or a strength because effectively you're trading that 2 spirit for 1 spirit differential, right? You're effectively taking that away from your opponent for other tools that you have in your arsenal. Again, Eddie is Elestral removal, some categorizing as well, which I think is a strength of the card. Now the weaknesses, again, a little small, which again can hurt with PTA, but depends on how you play this Eddie and playing it very mindfully, though you can get around its small stat line. It will get hit over or run over more often than not on the next turn. So on the crackback, Eddie might not be sticking around for a while, but if Eddie does its job correctly, you don't really care about that. It is a one-time use, so again, it's not a when receive like a Mudlet, so that can kind of be a little bit risky, and also it's easy to remove with things like Earthquake, with Cryoblast. Again, with Elestrals in its own self, Race to the Top was pretty common as well. So Eddie is a prime target for all that as its 1 defense stat line. That feels really bad. It's the Elichik problem, and that's fine. But again, I think these are how I would evaluate the card in itself. And those are my reasonings for evaluating it that way too. If you guys are taking notes or at all listening to this, then that is kind of how my thought process works when evaluating Eddie. And this is something that you should be doing for all of your Elestrals, whether it be a consistency piece like a Rummagem or like an OTK piece like Blazerus or Helios's Chariot Ride. Think about it in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. It could be as simple as what does this play around or play into? And it could be as simple as, well, what's on the card? Again, is it a small body? Is it a big body? These things can go as deep as you want them to, or they can be as shallow as sand. So let's do it for Thunderstorm again. I think this card is a little bit harder in terms of its actual like immediate recognizable or immediate evaluation, I guess I should say. Let's see. Not me sulking because I forgot to PTA you and Yeshin in my top 8. I did notice that. I did notice that, and I I will say it did come up. What's going on, Samia? Hello, good to see you. But this is effectively a harder card to evaluate, right? Elestrals can be somewhat easy because they do have these stat lines to go over, and so you can kind of say, oh, it's strong in different ways, yada yada. Let's talk about Thunderstorm. Thunderstorm is weird. Thunderstorm is a situational rune if I've ever seen one. Let's talk about its strengths. It's good into, obviously, heavy back row matchups. It's a target and destroyer rune card at a 2-cost Thunder. It's good into divine runes because you can effectively get rid of a major advantage engine from most decks, things like Demeter, things like Zeus, things like Apollo, which is pretty cool. And it's classified as rune removal, obviously. Now, these things are a little more on the surface, things you can see almost immediately. How would I play Thunderstorm and why would I play Thunderstorm? But let's talk about the weaknesses, because these things are a little bit less apparent. It's very expensive. Now, the 2 spirit cost of the Thunder is not like invisible. I think people see that, but it is something that I think people don't consider to be expensive sometimes. It's not a card you can splash into every strategy. And it's a card that even, again, I put it here, late game can almost be a non-card because you just straight up do not have the spirits to actually activate this card. It's 2 for the value of what you're getting for it, right? And so I think it has, again, speaking of diminishing returns, early game, this can help you gain some tempo and gain some advantage, but late game, risky play to activate this card. Now, the next bullet point is sometimes you're just unlucky. Now, sometimes your opponent sets 4. You pick a card and it's not the one that you need to win the game. And that can feel really bad, right? This card is pretty easy to play around it by just having multiple cards to set in the back row or have, some clear identification of. And also, too, big weakness of it is that Elestrals are also MST. MST, if you guys do not know, is a target and destroy a spell or trap card instead of Yu-Gi-Oh! And this is target and destroy a rune, pretty similar. The idea here is that every single Elestral, in theory, should be able to demand a response. Again, going back to Eddie, Eddie can effectively bait out PTAs, it can bait out shields, it can bait out Gorgons. Sometimes if it's paired with another Elestral, it has Tsunami capabilities, which is kind of funny. But the gist is that Elestrals are also doing Thunderstorm's job at a less risky and less expensive price. Does that make sense? And I don't think these things are particularly very like obvious to a lot of people. Again, the strengths of them I think are on the surface, but the weaknesses of Thunderstorm when you're going for your card evaluations is hard. Right? So let's recap a little bit. We talked about the webcam tournament and kind of some decks to consider. So if you're going to be picking a deck, great, good for you. Here are some things to think about when choosing your strategy. Again, what are the cards and what are the deck's strengths and weaknesses holistically and individually? Let's talk about coverage. Does the deck have necessary tools to win the game? We'll talk about some of those tools inside of the deck discussion here at the end. And is it easy to play? And what does the deck even do? What does it play as a whole? And can you do those evaluations on that card pool? We talk about it here a little bit for some things to how to evaluate the card, the Elestral's strength specifically, the consistency of the deck and some of the cards themselves. The Spirit Math, is it easy to play against? Is it easy to play with? Again, the coverage, we talk about coverage a lot, which is the good Elestral removal and good backer removal. When I say good, I don't necessarily mean like good as like, whoa, this card's great. It's more of, does it have a good amount of it? Different amounts, any amount at all? Is it even worth it to do that? Again, considerations to think of. And then obviously, how do those cards and how does that deck play into other strategies? Card evaluation of Eddy, card evaluation of Thunderstorm. Any questions there? And again, these are kind of just some basic analysis of these cards and kind of some considerations to think about. And some of these things might not even come up until after you play them. So we'll get into kind of that too, in terms of how do you evaluate a card? Because that is important, and that is important to think about. Got to restart my thing real quick. Perfect. Okay, moving on. Here are some essential questions to ask yourself in these evaluations, inside of your deck evaluations, etc., etc. Does my deck have the necessary tools to win? Again, we talked about it with the card pool, we talked about it with the strengths and weaknesses. These are pretty good questions to ask here for yourself before picking a deck as a whole. But you should be thinking about this. Again, this is effectively step 1, but could also be step 0. When looking at your strategy and looking at your deck, does it have the tools to win? Do you actually believe that? Yes or no? If it does, great. Still ask yourself this next question: what is my deck missing? Obviously not everything is perfect, right? If it was, then we'd have a strictly tier 0 format and everyone would be playing the same deck. But you must be asking yourself, what is my deck missing? What am I losing to, quote unquote? How am I accomplishing my goals, right? Like, is my deck efficient at accomplishing its win con, right? And some of that might be evident inside of what your deck is missing, right? Maybe it's not efficient at accomplishing its win con, and maybe you can add cards or take away cards to make that true. And not saying that you need to turbo it out. It's not about speed in which you get that win con, somewhat. It's more of the efficiency, and does that even make sense in the deck itself? And how is it accomplishing that goal? Why is it accomplishing that goal? Maybe your win con isn't really even a win con, but you've convinced yourself that that's true. You know, what is even that win con, right? Again, these are all some sort of questions that you must ask yourself inside of this process of card evaluations, of deck evaluations. Just think to yourself these questions here, you know? And these are passive things that your top players and the best players in the world are doing without even really thinking about it. They're doing these things almost second nature. They're doing it while playing. They're doing it while building. And it just takes time and practice. It really does. And you will get better at it too. Trust me. Okay, so we moved on to step 2. Again, short recap as well. Just people in the back who just got here. This is how to win at Elestrals. I'm Professor Swolax, current Elestrals champion, gonna be dethroned here in a little bit. I went 0-5 at the first tournament, and that is to say, things get better. This is also me, no particular reason, I just thought this was a really funny picture, and also, holy God. Anyways, think to yourself and put yourself in the championship mindset. You can absolutely do this, you can absolutely win, and even if you don't think so, that's okay. That's completely okay. But I believe in you. Okay, so we talked about picking a deck, some things to think about when picking a deck, how to pick a deck, how to scout decks even, and then doing some preliminary analysis of these decks, right? Kind of to see why these cards exist, why you're putting them in your strategy, and some examples of what to think about inside of those cards, right? What's going on, Alec? How's it going? Why did the bear deck not include Magistra or Glaciatia? Well, actually, fun enough, that does kind of go into our topic a little bit. Part of that is consistency. The cards themselves aren't necessarily consistent to get out. They're not very spirit efficient, which is kind of unfortunate. The deck can accomplish all of its goals necessary before even getting to that 3-drop at all. And that's kind of the rub of it. As well, your deck has better options than to go into the big bears at the moment. So that's kind of again, talk about card evaluation and why those cards aren't seeing play inside of a bear strategy. That would probably be why. at least on my initial guess, and we can kind of go over that a little bit later too. So, let's talk about the second step, which is now you've thought about the game, now you are going crazy because you're like, okay, I've thought for hours and hours, I've carefully considered all my options, I've built a deck, I can't think anymore, Swolax, I've got to kill again. And so you say, great, find somewhere to play. Can be at your local card shop, can be on the online locals, could be just a friend that you have, could be against yourself, like the actual Pixar guy playing chess back and forth. I did that for a while, that was fun. But the point of it is that you actually have to play the game now. Oh no, you have to play your favorite card game. That sucks. Now, here's some things to think about while playing, because we're not done thinking yet. Isn't that crazy? I baited you. I said, okay, we're done thinking. We're not. You will always be thinking when playing. That's even the crazy part. Again, you'll get better at it with time. But what are some things to think about when playing? We talked about some considerations before you start playing. But here are some things that I do personally inside of my play every single time I step onto the board. What is the spirit count? Super simple inside of Elestrals. It's your mana, it's your life, all wrapped up into one, and you need to know it. You need to know yours, you need to know your opponent's. You need to know it consistently, and you need to know it constantly. Right? And that's the really fun part, right? Is that you can just do that. That's a question you can ask. It takes no time at all to do, and it's public information. You don't need to have a consistent memory of how to do it, but you can keep track and you can keep notes. Personally, don't do that. I know I'm a bad note taker, but that's kind of the idea, right? Oh man, how dare you make me play a card game I enjoy. God dang it, make you think on top of that. I'm saying, absolutely. It's going to Viper's Wrath, hello, by the way. Hello, hello. So again, that's a question you can ask, and it's something that's really easy to do, but just start getting in the habit of every so often, every couple turns, just confirming your opponent's spirit count, right? And then the second portion of that, and this is the most important portion of the spirit thing to think about while playing, what is the spirit differential? Specifically, are you up in spirits? Are you down in spirits? These things will inform the plays that you can at all make. Maybe the spirit differential isn't that big, and thus you can't make that big of a push or that big of a play. As well, maybe you only have like 5 spirits left to your opponent's 6 or 7 spirits, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I can activate this Gorgon's Gaze and go down to 3. Can you? Can you do that? The spirit differential at that point goes to 4, right? That's wild. That's a pretty big jump. That's not just a counter rune. That's much more than you might think. So again, knowing what your spirit count is very simple, very easy to do, but also evaluating what the spirit differential is between you and your opponent is a very important thing that should inform the plays that you make. I bring up Toxion here as a great example of a card that also requires that type of thinking. Inside of the finals, there was a moment, I think inside of the game 1 against Jayak, where the play that wins the game is Reenchant Toxion, put my opponent on having no spirits that he can respond to, and then Toxion can freely swing for game. Again, getting yourself into those positions by thinking about, okay, I am up by this many spirits. My opponent's spirit count is 2, meaning that they can only activate these level of counter runes, right? Is it worth for those types of expends or those types of activations? Those are all things that matter when it comes to that, right? And the spirit differential is more how are you ahead in that category. But the idea here is that how is it advantageous to make a play like normal cast Toxion when your opponent has 20 spirits? It's not that powerful. But you could do it, I guess. But is it better to play it later? Maybe. Just depends on the actual status of the game. Think about it this way too. The next bullet point is the hand size, right? So how many cards does your opponent have available to them? Do they have 0 cards in hand? Do they have 2 cards in hand? 1, 5, 7? It doesn't really matter how many cards they have in hand, but what I'm trying to get across here, with same thing with the first bullet point, is that every single question here will be informing your next play, your next 2 or 3 plays. Again, a great example is, can I activate this counter rune when my opponent has 4 cards in hand? Maybe not. But can I make this play when my opponent has one card in hand? Absolutely. Because then you think to yourself, well, the odds of X, Y, and Z happening are so low that I might as well take the immediate advantage. For example, let's say you want to activate a PTA on your opponent's turn after they cast out an Elestral. Okay, great. But now they have 4 cards in hand. That PTA isn't as good unless you're getting some sort of other value off of it. But the actual decision to snap call on that PTA should just be whether or not that this is advantageous for you. And if it's not advantageous to do so, then maybe you just hold off on that PTA, right? That extra spirits that you're shilling out for it, right? In addition to that, if I want to, let's say, go attack position Astrabbit, which is a 2 attacker, then maybe it's not super smart if my opponent has 4 cards in hand. But if they have just 1 card in hand and I have like a set PTA or something, maybe that's not a bad idea, right? And that's also a big thing too, right? Keep in mind is tempo. Tempo is more of like an ethereal thing. That's actually a good question to kind of propose is like, should you be thinking of tempo in terms of like advantage, like how ahead are you? And that is true. Like technically being ahead in spirits and being ahead in board presence is tempo. You can outpace your opponent in terms of value. But it's not something that you should be like really thinking of in terms of like an actual tangible question you can ask. And so I do think it's a thing that you should be aware of, like how far ahead are you or how far behind are you? But the idea with that is that you also are able to fluctuate that at your own control or based off your opponent's control. What I mean by that is in a deck like Thunder, and we'll go over this a little bit in the deck analysis, is that cards like Toxion are ways to speed up tempo, to outpace your opponent, right? And that's kind of a funny thing, speaking of like a Thunder deck and Race to the Top, etc. But the other portion of that is like Quackle, the healer of the strategy. Now, when to play Toxion and when to play Quackle is completely up to the situation, but both accomplish different things. A Quackle is actually a tempo loss, right? Because technically you are progressing a small body to heal back some spirits. Now, technically that's advantage, but it's not necessarily board presence. It's kind of hard to say. But the general gist there is that that's a tempo loss versus a Toxion is more of a tempo gain, right? There's other factors there, but it's more of a basic example. So in general, the idea here is that tempo is like a thing that is consistently changing. And so asking yourself, what is the tempo here, is sometimes hard to do because you have to evaluate all these 3 questions in themselves. And so that does take some time to do. And most top players are doing that. Do not get me wrong. Do not get me wrong. Absolutely. That's 100% a thing to consider. But that does come with this consideration of when to slow down the gas or when to get your foot off the gas or when to just absolutely floor it, right? Those things do matter, and that's something that you'll learn over time. But the first couple things that you have to know before even getting to that point is, again, how far behind am I? Am I up an advantage? What is the game state currently? And do I accurately understand that game state? Then ask yourself this question: can I make the play I'm making? Like, can I, right? Like, I know I physically can lay down the card on the board, but is it something that I can afford? How is this going to be affecting turns, 3 turns from now? Because that is important, and I think it's important to kind of talk about, right? Like, be mindful while you're playing. Just think of these things, right? Yeah, Boombat is a good example of a situationally positive tempo card. Absolutely, because to me, in how I was effectively Boombat came down inside of most of the games that I was playing against, Boombat was actually a tempo loss for a lot of those players and for a lot of my opponents. You can see it inside the top 8 match or the finals match against Jayak. Forcing the Elechick trade with the Boombat was a tempo loss because you're foregoing your cast to hopefully bet the fact that I can't just immediately come back in with another one, right? That also demands a response. It's crazy. And that's I think the other part, right? But that's a good example of specifically like a situational card that also dictates tempo, right? When to cast that card, when not to cast that card, etc., etc. But that is all to say is that you should be thinking about these things constantly. You don't have to do it all the time. You don't have to be annoying about it or anything, but just think about these things and be a little bit more mindful about this. Just some things to practice too. Are you doing this in a game? Are you actually thinking about this often? And again, like I said, eventually these things will all become second nature. You'll just be doing it without thinking. Nanoseconds of your life will go by and you won't even notice because you're just like doing it play to play. Most people, when they get into the zone or flow state or whatever, are just doing this all the time, right? And you can even just physically ask, what's the spirit count? But sometimes you just know. You just know. Anyways, that all I'll say is to be mindful, right? Think about where you are and in every position, right? Like actually know where you are physically and mentally. That's a very important thing in life in general, is just kind of check in with yourself and make sure you're okay. But in Elestrals and trying to win in anything competitive, think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Right? What's your motivation behind a certain play, tactic, position you're putting yourself in? And those things are important to consider. Again, we're thinking. We're thinking, right? I'm in my house in a seated position. Me too. In this sweater and goofy glasses, But this is something to kind of like really go over. Yeah, a lot of decisions I made were forcing my enemy to play at a tempo I want, and then sitting on rabbit for 3 turns was a-okay with me. Exactly, because in that example too, that's like a position to where you don't really have to commit anything necessarily, but are able to set up and gain tempo back, because rabbit is a tempo loss. Absolutely. On some level, not always, but on some level. Now, again, something to be mindful as well is just how the next play will affect the next 2 turns. This is again hard to do, and we'll consistently be checking in with these questions, but the point is that some people just don't think 2 turns ahead. You don't necessarily need to. Sometimes you can just like play off vibes, but think about like, what am I going to do next after this play? What if my opponent has a response? Everyone has a game plan until you get punched in the face, and so you got to think ahead just a little bit. That's going to help you so much. And now, how do you think ahead? Well, again, ask yourself these questions. That should help illuminate some decisions that you're making. Is how can I think 2 turns ahead? Well, what is the impact of the card that I'm playing? Can I make that play? Right? Can I afford to be behind in this position? Maybe you have to commit. Maybe you don't have to commit. Right? And how will that commitment affect the outcome of the game? You should be thinking about that just a little bit. You don't have to. I'm not your boss. I'm your professor. But again, this is all a practice of being mindful. All right. Some more questions to think about. Can I walk, or do I have to run? Now, I talk about this a little bit in terms of like chess. Talk about checkmate, right? Like there's a pretty easy practice inside of a lot of chess drills and a lot of chess puzzles is like walking your opponent into checkmate is something that you really should get good at in practice, and Elestrals is no different at the moment. You need to learn, like, again, talking about the couple plays ahead and the 2 turns ahead, if you can see where the game is going, how can you get to your winning position either as fast as possible? What things need to happen for you to get into that winning position, right? And is that going to be the best thing to do? Right? Run the odds, play to your outs. Think about it, just a little bit. Do you have 1 copy of Earthquake left in deck? Do you really need those 2 Earth Spirits? And maybe you should hold on to them for dear life. If you think you can afford it, then get rid of them. It's very important to think about, right? Like a Lobolith in hand, obviously you're going to keep it, but if that Lobolith is still sitting in deck and you're at a point to where you just need to spend those Fire Spirits, then maybe you do actually need to, but evaluate if you need to first. Ask yourself that question. Is this the best play for me to get into a winning position? And again, think about it this way, walking your opponent into checkmate. Sometimes you can forcibly make that happen by requiring your opponent to respond to your cards. Again, it's kind of a little bit subjective because certain games and certain decks and certain cards just don't demand responses, which is again the whole balance portion. But in the theory here that every card or most cards in your deck should demand responses, this is something that you just have to consider of what type of responses and if your opponent has a correct response, etc., etc. This is not necessarily like even like a manipulation tactic or anything. It's just saying, how can I best place myself into a position to win? And can I do that by forcing my opponent to make that decision for me? Very helpful in that case if your opponent decides that you're going to be winning that game, right? That's not to say they're making necessarily a mistake. They might have to respond there, but again, something to consider. Okay, now let's talk about this too. We talked about choosing cards. We talked about evaluating cards. We talked about playing the actual game and thinking about the game. And now it's time to reevaluate, right? There's not a whole lot of slides after this. Evaluation goes back to what we were talking about earlier with things like, again, things like this type of evaluation inside of your play-to-play in the moment of playing. But it also is evaluation in cards as well. It just kind of depends. But the whole point of this is that it's a big cycle, not just in Elestrals, but in everything. You know, you choose a character, you choose a card, you choose a deck, you make some agency, you evaluate that choice, you evaluate the choices micro and macro, and then you play. You actually put into practice your theory, you actually put into practice your testing, and then you reevaluate. Was that thinking sound? Does it actually make sense? Does it accomplish what I'm meaning to accomplish? Am I even performing well? Again, this is a consistent loop and cycle that you'll be doing every single time you do almost anything. And I say choose a deck or cards here, but this also could just mean in your moment-to-moment gameplay, playing down an actual card and choosing if that's the correct choice in that moment, evaluating that in the moment, actually accomplishing the action and doing the action, and then reevaluating based off if you get punched in the face or not. That is just to say, this consistent cycle happens in everything from, I don't know, fighting games, board games, sports, but this is the flow chart of becoming mindful and applying some of the other tools that we've now talked about into your play. Now, spoilers on the next slide, but any questions with this? I feel like this is somewhat straightforward, and again, a lot of the stuff is straightforward. It's just a matter of kind of just seeing it in front of your face sometimes, you know? I'm gonna grab some water real quick. Okay, moving on. So let's talk about then this. Because I talked about this a little bit before, if you're gonna get punched in the face, that everyone has a plan before they get punched in the face. This is a really important step and arguably the most important step inside of your competitive journey today, which is the fact that you will lose. You're gonna lose. You're just gonna lose. And that's a fact of life. That just happens in anything you do where there's a zero sum, a competitive nature to it. You're gonna lose before you get better, before you win. Again, if we go all the way back in the slides, and I know this is like not the most efficient way of doing this. This is me. Well, first, this is losing. This is losing. Oh, that one was winning. I'll take that winning. This is actually hard losing. 0 and 5. You will lose before it gets better. But you have to be prepared for that loss as well. So the harsh reality of all that is that no matter how much thinking, no matter how much prep, no matter how much things you evaluate, you'll lose. And you'll think to yourself, I'm the worst player in the world. I suck. Again, we're getting to the mental game of this a little bit. But you're gonna have to come to some questions that you're asking yourself. Why did you lose? Oh God, why me? What happened? Oh man, this is terrible. And the one lesson that you can take from this, and this is if you listen to nothing else in this lecture, this is the most important section, is literally the mindset section. I know we just talked about the cards and technical play. This matters so little compared to this portion right here, and trust me, you can transfer this into any other thing you do. Is to think about your losses. Why did you lose? It's not always RNG. Trust me, it's not. You can't just say, oh, I got sacked. Oh, I got unlucky. Oh, he always had the out. That sucks. I just can't believe it. You can, and jokingly we oftentimes tease Josh, Bean Soldier TV, for that exact thing. He just always seems to have it. But again, I argue that Josh does the other things that we talked about just so far better than a lot of players, right? But you cannot always blame RNG or being unlucky. Take player agency and responsibility for your own plays and actions. Those things are deeply, deeply important. Deeply, deeply important, right? And also respect your opponent. Maybe they just skill diffed you. It's not that they just sacked you or that they're just consistently like, oh my God, like I cannot believe that I lost because of these BS reasons. No, you lost because you got outskilled, whether that be inside the deck consideration choice before the match even started or inside of the moment-to-moment gameplay. Maybe your opponent is doing those evaluations and answering those questions better than you. And that's a skill you can work at. You can't get better at RNG, no matter how many times I see people practice their dice rolls, even though you can on a spin down. But in general, it's RNG. It's random by nature. You will lose, and you have to be okay with that. Again, take responsibility for that. What is your own portion inside of that loss? And this is the most important part, respect that your opponent might just be better than you. And if you think about that just a little bit, you can definitely and desperately start to be okay with losing, right? You can't practice it, but you can minimize it. That's true, right? That's a skill thing. That's a thing you can prepare for. That's a thing you can get better at, right? The biggest thing here is that, like, if you blame everything on RNG or getting sacked or just bad game mechanics or et cetera, that takes out an actual player agency and some responsibility on yourself. And I think that's a bad mindset thing, unfortunately. And that's the harsh love of it, right? You'll lose. That happens, man. The more I lose, the more I'll learn. So I should play a bad deck and I can lose more. What's going on, Brandon? Hello, good to see you. Actually, you know what? Yes, because then you'll become the smartest person in the world. No, absolutely not. Right? Like, what will happen eventually as you start to lose and consistently lose is one of two things. Either number one, you're going to go down the rabbit hole of like the worst mindset, which is everything is not my fault, right? And everything is against and outside of my control. Or I just got sacked, right? That's the classic. Or you'll say they're just better than me. And that's not always true, you know? Not both those things are kind of equal. But what will happen eventually if you start to apply, again, the lessons that we talked about here in terms of like the pre-playing and then the technical play in itself, what will start to happen as you start to lose and evaluate and get better in theory, you should be getting better at this point, is you will win. You will win. Here, let's talk about something. Let's change the music to something a little happier. You will win. You will win. You will start to actually see the results of your practice and your evaluation over and over again if you just take responsibility for your losses. You'll start to win. Trust me, you will, right? Oh my God, I don't suck, I slay. Absolutely. You know? And you should be analyzing your wins too. Why did I win? You didn't win because of luck. Sometimes. But not always. Again, take player agency. Take responsibility for your own plays and your actions. That's awesome, right? You did it. Maybe you just skill diffed your opponent. Absolutely true and can be very real. The dichotomy, right? Look at these two slides. Why did I lose? RNG, agency, respecting your opponent. Why did I win? The RNG? Nah. Take responsibility for your actions in your own plays. Respect yourself in your own match. Maybe you just did it. And it's inevitability, in theory, if you are learning. It's not a question of reps done. It's, again, applying like a more mindful state to it all. And eventually, as you start to learn and grow as a player and start to actually like be more critical of your actual choices and take responsibility for those choices, you'll start to win. Simple as, baby. In fact, we'll go one step further. This gets into a little bit more of a deeper discussion into sports psychology and sports performance, But here is one thing I can impart onto you. And again, these are some of the more important lessons of this whole takeaway. As you can see by our slides like flying by here, we spent a lot of time thinking and pre-gaming the actual deck building portion. We spent only a little bit of time on the actual technical play because again, to me, the percentage matters much less as long as you're thinking about the game better. Those technical play sides will start to come to you. But now you actually have to think to yourself, you know, how are my wins and losses affecting me? And this goes into the mental side of becoming a champion and to winning at anything, but specifically inside of Elestrals or pretty much anything else. Now I'm stealing some of these from my time doing sports psychology and doing performance psychology. I think it's really important. And as you guys are sleeping on this, let me enlighten you. Do not assign value to your wins and losses. It's kind of a conceptual thing to think about, but the idea is that as you can see based off the slides and kind of the points that I'm making here, is that winning and losing are effectively just the same. They really are. Like, sure, you lost. Like you didn't win. Like based off the rules of the game and based off of like things that are effectively arbitrary, you didn't accomplish the thing to win. Again, I'm trying to steer clear of saying you just lost or you won, but like the general idea is that the actual thing itself, the winning and the losing, is the same thing, or at least it should be, right? And how you think about it, like you should be thinking about it like the same, right? Again, there is no good or bad. That's something that you need to get better at and think about when talking about your wins and losses. But in your moment-to-moment gameplay and decision-making, don't say to yourself, is this a bad play? Or is this a good play? Those things are so subjective. Try to think objectively here. How can you rephrase this card is good in an objective manner, right? That you can actually argue, right? Because you can't argue for good or bad. That's just your opinion, man. But the idea is that you're thinking objectively about these things, right? Avoiding subjective assignments on plays you're making, on good or bad choices, right? Because then what you'll start to do, as we are, kind of rewind a little bit, as humans and as people playing, we are generally risk averse. We tend to steer clear of things that bring us physical pain. When we touch a hot stove, we don't want to touch it anymore because it hurts. It gave us pain, right? We are assigning a negative value based off of, again, maybe more objective things that we are getting our skin burned off. But inside of let's say Elestrals or sports or whatever, if you're saying, was this a good play? You're assigning the binary to it. You're thinking to yourself, I'm going to always be looking for that play. And thus you will start to miss other things about the game and about your technical play. Is this play bad? You'll start to steer clear from it when not necessarily realizing that maybe that bad play was actually the best one to do. And again, best subjective, but one that would get you into a winning position. What if it got you all the advantage in the world, but you said it was bad, right? And it's not well, sometimes it isn't bad. Well, because that's subjective. What do you mean sometimes is it bad? So think about it in like that, right? Thinking objectively. Because it's also somewhat being honest with yourself about the play you're making and about anything that you're doing. And I'm trying to say like away from cards to make this a little more general, but the gist of it is that you play in the context in which you live in. Right? You didn't fall out of a coconut tree, right? Yeah, it's also hidden information. Sometimes the bad play is good depending on the hidden info. Kind of, right? Maybe you are making the right choice. And again, going back to the evaluation portion of it all, maybe in retrospect, it was the bad choice. Maybe it was the good choice, right? But the point is that you cannot think about it that way. You must not think about it that way, because if you do, then you'll start to spiral. You'll start to feed your ego, right? But like, I'm saying this too but it's okay to feel, right? That's the title of the slide. It's completely fine to feel. We're not robots, right? We got feelings, man. Yo. It's okay to feel bad when you lose. It's okay to feel sad sometimes, Mr. Rogers' ass statement, but like in the sweater, shocker. but it's okay. Yeah, it feels bad to lose. You can be down on yourself a little bit, but like, what of it? What does that do? It's not a very productive thing to actually assign there, right? And it's also okay to feel pride when you win, to pat yourself on the back. Those are important things to think about, right? Both, to me, are equally important. To recognize when you're doing well and when you're accomplishing your goals, and to feel a sense of accomplishment, but also recognize why you're feeling bad about a situation. Both those things are definitely okay, and it's fine. They're both fine. And like I said, neither of those things define you as a player. This is going to be your dad talking, not your professor. This is going to be your father here. You're not defined by your wins and losses. Just because I have 2 Elestrals champion belts under my belt doesn't actually mean anything. It does. Like I accomplished that goal. I can feel good about it. I can feel the time and practice that I put in to make me feel good. But the reality is that you got to stay humble. You do, because that's not going to define me always. No one will be able to take those wins away from me, because I did take those wins, but they won't always be true. Tomorrow, I might not be the Elestrals champion. In fact, I was the #1 player in Elestrals in the world, and then a week or 2 later, I wasn't, right? These things are fleeting. And so you must think about it that way, because otherwise, when you are on a big loss streak, you'll be really down on yourself and you'll say, I'm the worst. Again, going back to those slides about this, you'll start to say, God, I suck. You'll start to actually feed the other half of your ego and start to reinforce those negative feelings about your own self, your self-worth, your play to play, and then that'll start to affect these other things here about how you evaluate cards and how you're evaluating your play. It's all a big snowball, and it starts up here at your mind. Again, you gotta think about it. Assigning value, letting things go. We'll go into another Avatar reference if I had a nickel for this one. You know, Aang's trying to figure out how to unlock the Avatar state. And letting go of those, like those things of those assignments, right, in your life is kind of how it happens, right? And again, it's okay to feel. We do it all the time. I feel bad all the time. I feel good sometimes and all the time, right? Not to sound too depressing, but like those things are okay to do. But they don't define you. Neither of them, the good times or the bad times, because if you start to let it affect you, you start to feed the ego. Last bullet point here is you must learn when to boost your ego, and most importantly, when to shed it. That is what we call being humble. Ultimately, is knowing what your self-worth is and when to pat yourself on the back and when to boost the ego, and then when to drop it immediately. Know when you're at your limit. Again, I just started learning bass guitar. Now I'm really your father, Jesus Christ. And what ended up happening is, you know, I'm really excited to try to learn. I'm really excited to learn how to play certain songs and get certain grooves down, certain scales. But don't be delusional, you know? Like, I know I can't just immediately go in here and bust out like some sick funk. You gotta learn the baby steps first, right? And knowing that upper limit of your abilities can help you from making a fool of yourself, right? So talking as your father here, like these are the actual facts of the case, right? Is that like assigning these objective values, these wins and losses, you know, if they're good, if they're bad, if the play is good, if it's bad, none of that really matters. And when you start to do that, you'll start to feel bad about things. You'll start to feel an over sense of pride and ego. And that's dangerous. It really is dangerous, right? So important tool to do here is to practice when to feel good and when to feel bad, and letting yourself feel those things while conversely allowing yourself to recognize, again, the context in which you live in how those things came about. Right? Not good or bad, but the objective truth behind what happened. And that just means being honest with yourself. So there you go. If you know, you didn't get your talk from your father yet, that's me, unfortunately. And you're stuck with me, so there's that. I'm back when I missed. Oh shit, that's not me. Well, I mean, kind of. We're talking about mindset stuff now. We walked away from. I guess we can recap for everyone in the back, and then we can move on. Okay, so back from the start. This is how to win at Elestrals, or really anything competitive at the moment. I'm Professor Swolax. I was a loser, still kind of am, and very much so in the past. Now, first thing first, you have to believe that you can do it. You have to believe that you can actually be a champion. And I believe you can. I believe you can too. So you have to believe in yourself. If not, believe in the me that believes in you. So now you've decided to play Elestrals to actually become a champion. Well, first things first, let's make some deck considerations. Pick a deck. And this is a practice in how to think about Elestrals and how to think about your strategies and be more mindful to start off with. Again, this is the first thing. Again, if you're not quite sure the workaround here, it's not necessarily the physical activity of picking a strategy. It's more of just practice and being mindful at the game you're playing. Picking a deck, analyzing a top tier, maybe seeing what's good, what's bad inside the given meta, again, context. Analyzing the strengths and weaknesses, the coverage of your deck. And these things are just things to think about: the consistency, the strength of the cards. What does it cover? What is it good and bad against? Maybe making some pros and cons list too. Again, this is very rudimentary, very simple, but you can definitely do it. Ask yourself some questions while playing. Again, this is a practice in being more mindful, is asking yourself some example questions of some of these on the list. Next comes the hard part, actually playing the game. Well, this isn't the hard part. To me, it's the easy part, but that's also because I think the mental game is much harder. That being said, here it is. Again, asking yourself while playing these questions can be very important. Like, you physically know how to put down the cards on the table, but think about these things while you're doing it, you know? Being mindful, being very demure about it. Anyways, this is more of a small thing, and this kind of goes into the thinking about it on a deeper scale, is how to place yourself into the best position possible to win, given the knowledge that you have, and thinking about these things consistently. Next, this is the cycle that you're going to be putting yourself in consistently while trying to get up the top, is choosing cards, choices, plays, etc., evaluating those things before you even get to play or make those decisions and do those things physically. And then afterwards, I hope that you are thinking about it more consistently. Like, again, look at the top half of this chart. 3/4 of this process is thinking. It's mental. Isn't that crazy? Anyways, inside that process, inside of actually playing, that you will lose in that process. These are things that you might be thinking to yourself, but again, I urge you to take responsibility and take agency upon your own actions, as well as respecting your opponent. And if you do that while consistently trying to learn from your decisions, you'll win. You'll get there. But you also have to, again, ask yourself these things and think about it in this way while you win. It's the same coin. They're the same thing. Try not to assign value to it, because you'll start to feel bad, and that's okay. And you'll start to feel good when you win, and that's also okay. But once again, it's learning how to stay humble upon the road that you are traveling to become the best player in whatever game you want, but specifically inside of Elestrals. And that's okay. You will be too. Okay. Fun fact, when we get to the part where Barrett's the best deck, we are there now. So I told you guys we're going to be tying in some of the lessons that we have learned from this larger PowerPoint slide into the Elestrals meta. We are going to be analyzing some of the top decks inside of the game and talking about some of those deck choices, talking about the things we like, things we dislike about them, things that are strengths, weaknesses, and kind of the overall considerations that players had to make, the mindful considerations, if you will, that led them to the top levels. We're going to go over every single top 8 list inside of the most recent tournament. So, any questions on our lecture before we deep dive into this? I feel like we went over a lot, but hopefully you guys something good out of it. Again, there will be a test on all of this, as well as the notes and the more fun part that we're getting in here. So we'll get there. Is that my go Unkelith? You absolutely know it is. we got a little bit heavy towards the end there, but I just want to say that I do appreciate everyone sticking around for the lecture portion of this, and we'll get into the fun parts now. But you kind of have to get through that portion to be able to get to the fun parts anyways, and it makes it more enjoyable in my opinion. But maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just me. So, you know, take it as it is. It's also the top player mindset shenanigans. If anyone's watching this later on, we're only an hour and 30 minutes in. I'm assuming most people will get to this point in the video. Make sure to leave it a like and subscribe to the channel, etc., etc., etc. But there's that. Before you do my list, I only have 2 Moralith, but I'd play 3 if I had 3. I was actually going to ask why 2 Moralith. I figured it was more of a consistency thing, but you know, I think any copies of Moralith is good except for 1. 2 is probably good, and 3 is maybe overkill, but we'll see. We'll talk about that a little bit. So, you know, there's that. Some positivity here too while we're at it. Okay, let's get into the fun parts. Let's talk about. Let's go back to the little different music here. Okay. Second half of this portion is we're going to be talking about, and 2 different individuals about, some decks. So we'll go with this. I'm always saying this. What's going on, Dymax? Hello, good to see you. Dymax, did you miss the mental portion of the lecture? That's the most important part. And honestly, something that I think you would have really enjoyed. We talked about losing, about winning, about assigning value, and how to think about the game. The player mindset. Incredible. You know, when picking a game on paper, should I try to invest and pull cards from the deck I want, or would it be more mindful instead to invest in a structure deck? That sounds like an objective answer that you're looking for. The idea is that it doesn't matter. And pick whatever you think is best. So buy singles, actually unironically. Objectively, it's better to buy singles because it's cheaper. And so if your goal is to be more money efficient, wallet efficient, then yeah, buying singles is better for you. Buying a starter deck though can sometimes be advantageous, as again, evaluating that starter deck, you can see there's plenty of good staples and plenty of good stuff inside of it. So that's important to note too. There. What's going on, Hunter Surge? Hello, and congratulations on your top 8, by the way, as well. We'll go over everyone's top 8 list here in a moment, but I do want to thank everyone for coming out to the lecture portion of this. Now we're going into the practice portion of this. So this is where the homework comes in. I know. Let's open up the simulator. We'll go over some of these cards and these strategies, and we'll talk about them. So let me get that set up real quick. And I'll have to put this to the side. We're gonna have to go to this portion here. That way I can open this up. There we go. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-da-dum, bum. Why did I close that? I thought I had this open already. I guess I didn't. All right, let's open the simulator. Let's go into the lab a little bit. We'll analyze some top 8 deck lists. So just real quick, well, that's on the top 8 deck list. The top 8 deck list that we did see here, we have 3 Thunder decks, 3 Frost decks, 1 Bears list, and 1 BBC. Now, the Thunder deck and the Thunder decks and the Frost decks all have vastly different goals to them, but we'll kind of take a look at it real quick and you'll see what I mean. I'm categorizing them as Thunder and Frost here because they're effectively sharing similar tools, but they all kind of do something a little bit different, which I think is really neat. This meta is really diverse, and even inside of the individual spirit types, there's different game plans available. It's really, really interesting. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the simulator. Let's get into the lab. First things first, let's talk about I think we should go over in reverse, maybe. Who was eighth place specifically? Let's go over Dymax's list of Frost. We'll go over the Frost decks first. How about that? because I think that the Frost decks all went over into the 8th place category. I believe the top 8 Frost list that we have are Dimax, Hunter, and then Houdat, which is Insomnia Gaming here in the chat. So all these lists are Frost lists, but I think that this one in particular has to be the most unique, and that's the Dimax list here. This list is playing Waylance. Waylance is your Frost boss monster here, and it's absolutely incredible. I love this card. Now, very heads up of Dimax to center this deck around the Waylance. Now, Waylance is an 8/4 2-drop Elestral, a Frost, and a Water that says when this Waylance destroys an opponent's Elestral in battle, you can search that player's deck for any number of cards with the same name as that Elestral and send them to the Underworld. Now, this is a really cool card because not only does it get you a deck profile, but it's also a really hard body that is not able to be outed by Eddie, and it is Tsunami immune. It feels bad to PTA and shield anything more than a 1-drop. And this card, you want to Gorgon's Gaze it? All right, it's still on the board. You got to deal with it now. Really, really cool. Cryoblast immune too. That's a great point because it's Frost typing. Now, when doing some deck evaluations here, let's talk about some of the things to consider. Now, the deck is surrounding Waylance, and let's talk about some of its supporting methods. So, first things first, what we're going to talk and think about here, again, is the Elestral strength. That 8 does so much. It's an important thing there, right? Waylance, when you're big power players, has an 8 attack body. It's a very strong Elestral physically. Moralith is a 6/4 that you can consistently drop on your opponent because of how this deck wants to play out. And it's a very strong Elestral. Oh no, I'm late to class. I hope I don't get detention. Unfortunately, Kay. You're not late. You're in the tail end of it. You missed the important portions where we talked about everything else that's actually important. So unfortunately, you'll have to do some makeup homework and you might have to stay after class, but that's neither here nor there. The test will still be happening though, and so best of luck to you. You got it too? Kevin did get it as well, unfortunately. A lot of my students just miss the actual good portion, the actual important portion of the lesson. But that's okay. Anyways, let's analyze the deck a little bit further. Again, we're talking about the strengths of these bodies. So we have some pretty hard bodies here in the form of Eddie, which again, we talked about the card evaluation for Eddie of being very strong and very good into most different counter runes and having a lot of good counterplay. We have Narpoon, the Poon, which is again very similar stated to Eddie, so it's a pretty decent beater, has a pretty good defensive stat as well in this form of a 3, so things like Astrabbit cannot hit over it. It is Tsunami Moon, it's a consistency piece, which is amazing. The other portion of this too is that consistency piece really does matter, as it does get you into your primary combos of things like Moralith for a big body, Lycan form, your Catarant. I can't search Moralith, that's not what I really mean there, but the point is that it can help set up for the Moralith. It can also effectively be your enabler for an extra heal. As well, it gets you into your Lycan form and Terror form and Frost-X, which is a big comeback mechanic, which is there. But fighting for my life, trying not to save, so what can I get? Good thing I resisted. Oh yeah, I know, absolutely. Good thing you resisted. Doesn't look like resistance to me, but oh well. Let's move on. So these bodies are all pretty big, and a lot of decks cannot handle the consistency of this strategy. Again, the idea is that you're trying to open up Moralith and Lycan form to establish early dominance and pressure. That Moralith being a 6/4 is extremely hard to out. I remember being inside of the top 8 against Houdat, playing a very similar strategy where a Moralith and Cryovern, we'll get into that a little bit later, was extremely difficult to out. And I had one option, and it was Unk, baby. But effectively, that is going to be more of like the strengths of this deck in terms of its actual Elestral strength. Now let's talk about coverage. What does this deck cover? Well, it's got big bodies to help force responses and to help destroy Elestrals and Elestral removal. Speaking of Elestral removal, it's got native Cryoblast inside of the engine, which is, again, very, very strong into a lot of different strategies, and it's effectively cheaper Earthquake sometimes. I think this deck is playing Mountains of Boreas, which is also really cool, making these already pretty hard to out Elestrals even harder to out. Can sometimes boost the Catarant, which you're re-enchanting to specifically heal and become like a large body. And it's also playing things like Rise from the Ashes to help consistently turbo out and get to its win con of the Waylance or Morlith to actually put on some pressure and that damage. Again, we're talking about this in form of rune removal. It does play a form of Indus, aka the Morfrost Indus form, and this is, I think, pretty okay rune removal overall. I think this is a one-of copy to help facilitate the combo more than anything, but I like the idea, and it is technically coverage, which is nice. Morfrost Terraform is also a coverage piece, as well as Morfrost Lichen Form being a consistency piece. Those things we talked about earlier that everyone apparently missed, we have kind of on full display here. This is a great deck consideration, a very heads-up play on the meta. And we're only going to talk about the main deck here, as the side deck here is also just kind of just coverage for that, which is there, right? Yeah, frequently Indus's job was to crash with rabbits and to make sure it didn't get shielded. Also great, again, that's the technical play side of things, the actual accomplishment goal of something like an Indus form and how it plays into the strategy. Excellent heads up and excellent tip from Dimax there too. Because oftentimes people will put this rabbit into attack and you'll want to swing on the bunny, right? But oh well. So that is big things to consider. It also has good spear management in the form of Catarant, so native heal. We're going to see that a lot pop up inside of the top decks here. But yeah, I would say this was a very heads-up strategy. Obviously performed super well, and congratulations to Dimax on their top 8 finish. This was a really cool list to play against. I remember testing against Dimax a lot, and this was a very scary strategy every time it came down. Very, very cool. All right, next. Let's talk about where is the next one? Hunter Sage, or Hunter Surge, excuse me. I think I put Hunter Sage, but this is Rhinosect, Cryosect, if you will. Completely different strategy inside of the Frost engine. Again, let's take a look at some of the overlapping pieces. We have Narpoon for consistency, Eddy for a decent beater, Catarant for heal, and Cryoblast for Elestrals removal. But the difference here is that you're putting in a bigger form of tempo and bodies in the way of Rhinosect, which is a very interesting Elestral, as if you have multiple Rhinosect and a Rhinymph or any sort of Elestrals artifact or any sort of artifact on the board, you can Rhinosect for their life savings. Life savings you can just bring down and drop 3 or 4 Rhinosects inside a turn, and I think that's very scary to deal with and very problematic, unless you're specifically playing Wind Heal or something, you know? Then Cryoling here to kind of back up the play, and again, demanding responses. We talked about a little bit inside of the lecture portion of this, playing cards that will demand responses. If you guys are at all familiar with the previous lectures as well, you know it's a very good thing. Cryoling, which will demand either a Gorgon's Gaze at the very least, and Cryovern, which definitely demands a response. That 7 body is not insurmountable, but it is really hard to deal with. And 8 body is even better, especially if you can turbo cast that out. Warmite's an interesting inclusion here. I do like the Warmite here as far effectively, again, as an Elestral that demands a response, as it'll typically out most defense position Astrabbits and anything that's big, like a Chronodile into -5, or I don't know. You could use it for various applications. Chronodile is definitely not a good one, but just kind of for example. And then Cryo Scorch is also really interesting. As a 3 ascend game ender, but also you are playing enough 2-drops to where even if you hard draw the Cryo Scorch, such a big body like this is going to be very hard to deal with unless you have specifically a Shield of Achilles, which at that point you're burning yourself for 4. That just feels extra bad. That just feels extra bad. Hunter says, loved it with less removal around threatening with the 5 defenders, was very nice. Interacts extremely well with Mustation and Galaxy. Absolutely, right? Because the portion of this too is that a lot of the stuff is bigger than the biggest bodies inside of Elestrals. And again, Rhinosect is such an interesting card because Rhino in itself, very unassuming Elestral, but again, demands responses from things like Gorgon's Gaze, and then Rhinosect will effectively eat everything else. So the flex option too to enchant these 2-drops with water to make them tsunami immune is also very heads up, as we did see that Draken was pretty represented inside the format, which is cool. So there's that. Let's What's going on, Buys Regret? Hello, good to see you. Another 8-hour stream? Maybe. We just got done with our lecture portion and everyone here is late for it. So glad I wasted hours making those slides. But whatever. You guys also, if you're coming in here late, you missed embarrassing photos of your professor. That's the whole point of the lecture. Anyways. Congratulations to Hunter on their top 8 finish. I think that this is also an incredible deck. I love that Frost is getting representation. And moving on, we're going to talk about Hudat's list, which I played myself inside of the top 8. Let's go down to Hudat. So this is Hudat's list. Now, Hudat did clarify that Moralith, as a 2 of in this, was actually supposed to be a 3 of, but you know they don't own 3 Moralith, and that's very much okay. This deck performed without it, and it was still very scary. I narrowly escaped death, and I mean it. I had 1 out, and specifically, it was an altar play to save me for the turn, and then Unkelith dropped to OTK a Catarant. That's how I was able to survive. It was a close match, and it was a close game, and it would have been easily different if a couple other things happened. It was insane. It was insane. Yeah, this list looks so cool. I think this list is really, really heads up. Again, let's talk about some of the inclusions here that are different from the other list. We have things like Boom Bat and Earthquake. We have Lavalith here to kind of focus a little more on the removal portion. You know, this kind of looks like a 5s Frost deck, if you will, by having the big bodies of Cryovern, Moralith, and Cryoling. It is playing 2 copies of Indus Form as more of a backer removal, as well as a pretty decent card to get your Moralith online. Catarant at 2 if you're a Spirit Control and you're in Frostics for mad comebacks. Only 2 Cryoblasts though, which I think is kind of interesting. Again, maybe because you're also you're maining 2 Tsunami, the Nogs, and more removal like Earthquake. And you'd think that make the Spirit math a little bit funky, but you're playing 11 Frost Spirits. That seems plenty for what you need. You're always misenchanting the Cryovern and maybe sometimes misenchanting the Moralith, but like again, you are using these spirits as either damage or holding out for dear life that you have your Lavalith. I think that's pretty cool. Once again, we're going to take a look at this list here. They all accomplish various different things. Like this one and Hunter's deck are very similar, but this one is focused more around the single drop removal of stuff like Boom Bat and utilizing the single 1-drops to a bigger advantage, while still being able to switch and turbo into a Moralith and Cryovern beatdown, which is, again, very hard to deal with and can just easily snowball. In the side deck, too, you see a larger package of the Morfrost cards to kind of reinforce that 1-drop synergy in the Frost. And this list plays extremely differently from the other 2 lists that we saw here. As far as it plays similarly to the Rhinosect list, but Rhinosect's game plan is a little bit different. And congratulations to Hudat on their top 8 finish, by the way, too. I'm buying Moralith. I need this. Moralith is crazy and will definitely be seeing more play, as this strategy does help facilitate a very strong big-bodied Elestral. So once again, 3 different Frost decks, 3 different considerations, and 3 different things that these decks do. Right? I think that's so cool and really showcases the differences in how people build and the different game plans available in Elestrals right now post the ban list. Right, let's move on. We have a few other decks to talk about. I think we have the JT Speed list for Thunder. Let's talk about the Thunder list real quick, and then we'll end the night with Bears, because I think the Bears talk will be very important and also probably go on forever. So there's that. This is the GOAT's deck. GT Speed is GOAT T Speed. I don't want to put GOAT Speed. I don't think that really works here, but we'll put G for GOAT instead of J. This list is incredible. This list is so cool. Voltempest is back, baby. With the lack of removal and the lack of Lavalith and Laurels inside the format, getting to big game plan boss monsters like a Voltempest is very much possible, and very much a thing that I like that was put into practice here, right? The general consideration and idea is that Voltempest is a big, beefy body that can burn your opponent and is untargetable with Zeus, meaning it's very hard to out unless you have specifically shield. And what's crazy is that JT's playing shield on the side. That's so cool. You'll see that a lot in some of these decks is that they're not necessarily either maining shield or they're playing shield in other capacity in the side deck or otherwise, because like, I don't know. Shield of Achilles kind of consistently performs to be, or consistently is the worst counter rune overall sometimes. Like the idea of the counter runes is that like removal, and as removal is king, the shield isn't really removal. It's kind of just delaying the inevitable. Sorry about my hair. I'm just like really aware of it right now. So that's the first consideration in the first portion. Oh, that middle part's crazy. Hold. Fixing it. Sure, that's fine. So that's the first portion. Now, opting for things like Race to Top at 2 inside the deck and heavier reliance on counter runes like Tsunami and Helios' Chariot Ride is also really cool. I like the idea that Helios' Chariot Ride is effectively just to make sure the Voltempest can stick down, utilizing Griff use, which we haven't seen in a while. That's like insane. That's absolutely insane, right? The crazy part about this list too is playing things like Mustation as either a big body beater with the things like the water, or as a thunder or wind enchant to sit on until you get Voltempest, and you can just do that because 6 is sometimes a hard card to out. That's nuts. That's gnarly. That's insane. Altar Star is also pretty good too by having a counter rune that is able to further your goal of getting the Voltempest down and dropping the Voltempest. So for example, you can be on like a Quackle, and then you'll say someone attacks into the Quackle, you can go Altar of Stars, put it to defense, and then next turn drop the Wind Enchanted Voltempest and win the game on the spot. Very, very cool. Love the addition of Toxion. Toxion's my goat. People were saying Toxion sucks and Toxion, you can cut Toxion. I disagree. I think Toxion's really strong and honestly is one of the best bodies that Thunder can play. Again, it's a really interesting tempo card. Quackle is one and the same. Again, this deck has a lot of good tools. Let's talk about the tools inside of a Thunder strategy for consistency. Things like Rabbit, things like Elchik, things like Jolton, maximum copies of consistency. Things like removal natively, like Race to the Top, and has tempo cards like Quackle for Spirit Advantage and Toxion for Spirit Advantage, just kind of in the other way, right? As well, Voltempest and Griffuse are interesting inclusions. Griffuse is a 5 body, which is pretty good. And on top of that is a Nexus tool. So you don't even have to necessarily Nexus to itself, but typically you would want to as a 1-card enabler with or 2-card enabler with the Zeus combo. But you could also technically put it on Rabbit or Toxion, which I think is hilarious. So very cool. And I think congratulations to JT on your top 8 finish as well, I want to say, because this was crazy, and the match against Coder was excellent. Obviously we'll talk about Bears here in a little bit, but that was super fun to watch. And if anyone wants to check out that VOD, it's also on the stream too. This game was incredible. So once again, talking about it, consistency pieces, removal, game plan, deck considerations, right? Making sure your game plan can go through. That's pretty big. All right, next. Let's see. We have Cardimax, Jayak. Where are you? Where is Sky Guy? Sky Guy, my more closely related Thunder brethren here. Now, again, the last strategy of Thunder was focused around Voltempest, the big bad boss monster of set 1. We also have Sonicore, another big bad boss monster of set 1 in the Thunder element. Sonicore is, if you're familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh!, a Jinzo. Effectively, it means that Sonicore's cast cannot be chained by counter runes. While Sonicore is in attack position, players cannot cast counter runes at all. So we did see that come up inside of the top 8 or the top 4, where Sky Guy and I were playing, and I happened to drop Eddie, which was able to out the Sonicore and play around PTA as well, which was really, effective. The big use case for Eddie is that Sonicore is not unoutable. It's just really hard to deal with. And I'd argue inside of a deck like Thunder that is playing all these Ascension lines, so things like Boombat to ascend over things, Sonicore, whenever you're playing like smaller bodies, you can put this over the bigger bodies and accomplish more things. Very hard to deal with, especially with removal being less, things like Earthquake and Laurels, yada yada. It's harder to deal with locks like this. It's only a matter of time before Leonite and the Leonite lock gets good again, I think. Like that's a very powerful strategy in theory, and so this idea is somewhat similar. You're utilizing these strong consistency pieces of Astro Abbot and Elichick and Jolton, as well as some removal like Race to the Top and technically Eddie for a big power player. But also you have the nightmare, absolutely, of Sonicor. Sonicor is such a cool card. I love the artwork inside of set 1 specifically, but oh my god, is this card hard to deal with. Counter runes is such an important portion of Elestrals, and this card shuts out that entire mechanic. Some would say it's unfair, but there's clear counterplay around this card in a lot of cases. So that's something that was pretty heads up by Sky Guy. I do think though that playing a lack of Quackle or lack of heal into this deck ultimately is a big differentiator between a deck like this and something like JT's and myself, is that those lists or that those cards that do enable a little more of the spirit management. You can see they're in the side, but in the main they can be pretty helpful. And again, I argue that Quackle is a card that is one of the best to ascend over in that way, right? Just Cryoblast it easy. Exactly. It's not Cryoblast immune, so again, there's pretty clear outs here, but the idea too is that this deck is a little bit expensive, which I think is kind of rough. See the inclusion of 2 Tsunami inside the main, which I'll get to my deck list in a little bit, and we'll talk about the Tsunami aspect of it all, but I'm not the biggest fan of it right now inside the meta, and I also got punished by that earlier, but we don't have to talk about that now. That being said, congratulations to Sky Guy on the top 4 finish in the quarterfinals. And this was an incredible list to watch. Oh, I think JT, I misspoke. That was the quarterfinal match, I think. I could be wrong. Seems similar to my theory behind Helios, just a way to end the game in 1 turn. Yeah, effectively that's a big top 8. Okay, that's right, that's my mistake. I didn't misspeak. I got to catch it. All right. So next, let's talk about the two finalist lists. That's hello, Jayak. Hello, Jayak 106. Is that what? What? Kerbussi? Jayak? Whoa! It saved over it. That's crazy. I had it all listed out and lined up here. Wow, that's wild. I'm gonna have to pull up an alternative document. Whoa. All right. Well, luckily it was posted on Twitter, so I don't have to do anything super crazy with it, but oh my god. Okay, that's perfect. Boop. Okay, Jack's list looks way different than I expected, I'm saying. So here's what Jack was playing today. It was water big body beatdown, or wet 5s, so very wet 5s indeed. So the really funny part about all of this is that this deck list I am so confused about. Jack made it to the finals, so it's not like unheard of that this deck was good and can perform. I'm just so confused because it's like, and I made this joke inside the stream. It was you looked at the top 2 decks of base set and you said yes. You just said I'm gonna slap Earth into a water 5's body with some thunder in it. That's wild to me. Let's go over this deck choice. 3 Mustache, 2 Elichick, 3 Rabbit, 2 Boombat for the removal, 1 Earthquake, 3 Tip, 3 Tsunami, 3 Shield of Achilles, 2 Demeter, the mommy herself, 3 Eddie, 3 Galaxy, 1 Lavalith, 2 Equilinx, 3 Ambrosia, 3 Gorgon's Gaze, 1 Resting, 2 Mudlet. Spirit Math out the absolute craziness, 6 Tyrantalus, 4 Zaptor, 8 Leviathan, 2 Vipyro. That's for the 1 Lavalith as well, by the way. And the side deck, I think, maybe is a big key here. We're seeing Sluggle and Quackle and some other control portions with the Cryoblast and Boombats effectively smoke screening into the heal stall deck that was so prominent in the past couple of tournaments. This list is 5s by all intents and purposes, but it's playing some extra back row removal, right? The joke that I heard earlier was that Equilinx is like your poor man's Lavalith, and I think that's like not too far off. It's a pretty decent big body beater that can play well with the Demeter. But yeah, this is a very interesting list. It kind of goes to showcase that with enough technical play, a little bit of deck building prowess, you can make a list that has a lot of weird incidental synergies and play some big bodies on top of it, right? Like it sounds somewhat negative, but it's really not. I think this list is also really cool as it accomplishes something completely different from the previous Fives deck. It's slower by default because you have to go for the Searchers with Elechick, and then Equilinx Demeter is a 2-card combo compared to like a 1-card combo. It's a very experimental deck, and I kind of like that because, again, the idea is that Demeter is like your second best divine here with the search off Elechick, and your Equilinx is a way to pop back row and to deal with counter run removal, which again, like we said, is one of the most important portions of deck consideration. You have big body beaters, and that's a strong consideration. You have plenty of removal, and as well, plenty of consistency pieces. This is a deck to consider. This is a deck that follows all the conventions that we just talked about earlier in the lecture. If you guys missed it, that sucks. That's very, very important. Very important. You miss me being the dad. Anyways. The point is, though, and congratulations, Jayak, on your finalist placing. I think that this was a really fun deck to play against as well. I have never seen a deck quite like it, and I was definitely terrified seeing certain cards come down. That Lavalith, whenever it did come down, was really scary. Glad it worked out, selfishly. But this list is incredible. It really is something that, like, analyzing it on a micro level, you can get really detailed with these interactions and when to place cards. And I do think that's the overall skill level of Jayak here, is knowing when and where to place these cards down and how that impacts the game and the game state, as well as controlling the space with things like Equilinx and like the high amounts of removal that you could, right? So that is effectively the Jayak Fives, the big body beatdown. I don't want to call this 2.0. This is definitely like a 1.5 or 1.3. It's like it's a different version of the Fives that is playing some of the Nexusing tools, right? I do like Mudlet in here, Mudlet my goat, and Eddie, of course. I think Eddie is incredible. So I don't know. I think it's kind of neat. Anyways, let's move on. This is as close to Monarch thought. It kind of is, right? It's like a weird combination of Monarch and Nexus stuff. Oh well. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the winning list before we talk about the best list. This is mine. This is my list. This is Unk Save Me. Now, deck profile for this coming out sometime soon. So if you're not watching this on the VOD or watching this as well, we can go over it. Let me grab some water before we yap a little more. There we go. Okay, so this is the Thunder list I brought to the event. So let's go over a little bit why Thunder. Well, let's take a look at Thunder. You guys might recognize this list as the list we built the other night when we were trying to build for different element decks. A lot of the decks that you saw here tonight are kind of similar to that too. But this one in particular is effectively 1-for-1. I just traded the resting inside of the side for the one Toxion in the main, and I'm glad I did. Toxion came up a lot. Toxion my goat. But this list here, I do firmly believe is a very strong contender for one of the best decks inside of the entire meta. Played extremely well, this deck can accomplish everything it needs to. It has an OTK assistance and a big body in the form of Arcalith, which can help punish aggression, as well as re-enchant spirits to your board, which sometimes you can lack. It's effectively a heal card and an aggro card, and can randomly do 4 and 5 damage. It's pretty big. On top of that, it plays well into Mount Olympus, so the synergy is there. You have consistency pieces, once again, in the form of Astro Rabbit and Elechick and Jolton. You have some pretty strong beaters in the form of Eddie and Toxion. Toxion's also a different form of tempo card, which you can use to, again, put your foot on the gas a little bit and put some pressure on your opponent without actually having to do too much. Sometimes what would happen is I'd play Toxion and just re-enchant Toxion and then just burn and burn and burn until my opponent responded. That's taking advantage in some kind of weird ways, but you can do it. Quackle too. Quackle has been an MVP for the strategy. Under something like the Olympus, it's a 4 defense body, which does out most things with the Race to the Top. So sometimes what you can do is hold off on taking Ambrosia off your Rabbit, and you can take a Quackle for an extra body, which is then a 3, not insurmountable as well, but sometimes hard to deal with. And you can heal back spirits in the process. The consistent recycling of spirits and utilizing Ambrosia and Quackle here is a very strong loop that effectively gets you a body in the form of Quackle and an Ambrosia, meaning that you have 5 copies of your heal in both amounts of Thunder, which is your most common spirit, or your spirit type. So again, good spirit math. This thing is pretty easy to handle on. You do have to manage your earth and water spirits a little bit, but it's not too bad. Eddy is a great idea here. I think it was good and overperformed for me personally. I used the blue eddies we pulled on stream the other night. Shout outs to Blue Eddy. But the idea here too is that sometimes the smaller guys like the Quackle and the Astrabbit can then put pressure on things with Eddy. In addition, Eddy paired with Zeus is almost impossible to play around. You have to Gorgons and PTA it or shield it, and it all feels terrible. This is why I was saying PTA does not affect Eddy that much, is because oftentimes I'd have an Eddy and a Zeus. And Eddy comes down, PTA, okay, cool, I'll Zeus and still get over the guy anyways. Very, very strong card. I love Eddy so much. Honorary Thunder. Thundward also came down a few times. We had a big 5 body under Mount Olympus. Let's talk about native removal. It does play the one copy of Earthquake in the main, again, Laurel's is in the side deck, but it does have coverage in the form of Race to the Top to kind of make up for those missing forms of removal that we lost. Now, you were playing Race to the Top before, but you might be playing less copies of it. I really, really liked Race to the Top in this list. I think Race to the Top at 3 maybe is a little bit bricky. You might want to play 3 Olympus instead, because you're going to see these combo pieces, and sometimes you do bring out all 3 Joldens, so just having that mad advantage is crazy. Stadium Wars are a thing, so against Solar, against Earth, against Water, sometimes you might see those stadiums come down, and Olympus is the best one because it pairs off with your Jolton, making it an immediate 5. And it's a Nexus target for your Astrabbit and Toxion, which is, again, going back to Alter, one of the best cards inside of the game that you can utilize at its highest capacity compared to other strategies. Raise the Top 2 is just cheaper removal on subsequent uses, and sometimes is just Earthquake if you really need it to be. Then that also means it's a tempo card. Again, Thunder in itself right now in this format is a tempo strategy. Whether you're taking away tempo, whether you're giving tempo, you can choose to do that depending on the situation at large, but ultimately, I felt like this list accomplished all it needed to, and when considering the deck choices, the other cards in the meta, and how to construct this strategy the most effective, I think this thing had all the tools necessary to lead to a Swolax win. Go me, baby. That's me boosting the ego. See? Important. But now I'm going to shed it, because I suck. Nah, it's cool. Side deck considerations, I really only cited in Thunderstorm, Cryoblast, and Laurels. I didn't really cite in anything else. These things didn't really come up except for specifically the Thunderstorm and the Cryoblast. Arguably, Thunderstorm did come up. And if I had a nickel for every time Thunderstorm won me an Elestrals tournament, I have 2 nickels. And you guys have still $1 billion because I've used that joke a little bit too much. So yeah, I wonder how Rise would feel in this list. There is some experimentation to do with Rise inside of this strategy. Because I think that's like a lot to consider here. Like there is a lot to this deck in terms of, how do I put this? Arcolith in the form of Rabbit, like you bring back Rise into Rabbit and then Arcolith comes down on top of that. It's this mad advantage that your opponent does actually have to play around. It plays around PTA, it plays around Gorgon's Gaze, it plays around Shield in the form that Arcolith's not good into Shield. But I think what's crazy about that is you get the advantage off the Astrabbit, the 1 draw, digging you deeper in, and then you can hard ascend on Arcolith on top to OTK afterwards. Then you have the Quackle 2 to heal back, and sometimes Rise can just be off the Arcolith itself, same thing with the Thunderstorm. But Maybe that's just me. So I think this goes into what we're going to talk about here in a moment, which is going to be the Bears portion of our discussion, the actual best deck of the tournament. And we're going to talk about that. So let's get into it. Let me see if my boy's available, and we'll discuss. Kevin, if you're still here, let me know. Otherwise, I'm gonna I might still take a break and go get some water and go to the bathroom, but let me know. I might put on the keys for a second. Okay, I really have to pee. You are Smile? Okay, cool. All right. Give me like 2 minutes. I'll be right back. Boop. Okay, I'm back. Take away the jingling keys, and we'll get Kevin on the line. Boop. Boop. At Distant Coder. Hello.
Hi.
Okay. Oh, hey, your thing's already up. Okay, cool.
What is my reactive picture?
I don't know.
Hold up.
You chose this one.
I could do better. Hold up.
All right.
I will make it look better. I'm going back to talking Ash Blossom.
Okay, I'll put this down a little bit. Chat, let me know if you
Shout out to Ash Blossom.
Chat, let me know if you can hear Coder a little bit. You can yap for a bit if you want.
Hello, chat. Hi, stream. How y'all doing? Are we talking about the best deck ever made?
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
All right, guys. Let's talk about the other top topping list from this event. And that is bears. Let's go over the bears list. The best bears list and the best deck inside the entire game. This deck profile just went up today, so if you guys haven't seen it, make sure to check it out. In addition, we have the best pilot for that possible, which is Ground Deficit Coder. Well, not Josh.
Where is he?
He's gonna pop in here, and we're gonna have another like 7-hour stream call. That's the problem.
Bro, he was in VC with Trish not 2 seconds ago. It's like, it's coming.
Incredible. Okay, let's talk about bears. So we're talking about different meta considerations, different things to talk about when being a little more mindful inside of the game of Elestrals. And, we had a good point, and I think you had a good point, that this is kind of falls into all those categories. Not only is the pilot able to take this to a top 4 finish, but also is, clearly seeing that this deck has a lot of different tools and things available to it to bring success. So do you want to go over the list?
I mean, yeah, I've made some changes. I actually am trying a couple of new things that I'm excited to actually like work with. But I think the list in general was really solid. I was really happy with how most of it performed. I think the one thing that was like a super last minute addition that I think really worked well was the small Tugas. Like, it just feels good to basically have an Ass Rabbit that you get to play that always gets you exactly the thing that you want, which is Ursier. It just felt really good. Other than that, I think the bear ratios were perfect, except for like the Scout. I'm jumping back and forth between, do I play more bears or less bears? Right now, I'm going to be trying a list that mains one Scout, just as like the 4th Ursier, that sides the 2nd Scout with an Coat for like the big like 3-drop decks, because if you go like Scout into Coat, how do they out it? That sort of thing. Trying some new stuff, but I think the deck did really well. I think the one really big glaring weakness with it is how poorly it plays into every back row in the game, because every counter rune in the game is super overtuned, and this deck needing to land an attack to play is really rough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So like, how did you, I guess, play around that or into that? Like, what kind of either supporting pieces inside the deck, or what kind of considerations did you make to help with that big weakness?
I baited people into activating their runes at very inopportune moments, making it feel like it was the correct moment. The amount of times where I will attack with an Ursier into a defense positional Elestral without having Don't Poke set, and they assume I have Don't Poke, and they fire a Tsunami or fire a Shield or whatever. Or even the amount of times I'll go, Ursier, attack your defense position Ass Rabbit, and they go, I will activate Gorgon's Gaze. I go, you know what, buddy? By all means. And I have 2 set, and it's like a Shield and a Tsunami, and I'm like, yeah, bro, we're big chillin'.
Yeah, so I guess the inclusion of this list too, that chat, if you guys do not know, the big thing that happened inside of Daybreak was Don't Poke the Bear, which is definitely this deck's biggest, power player.
Card's amazing, bro. Such a good card.
This thing's insane. Now, again, the Rhino Sect and some of the like Waylands, shouts to Dimax, has a Stream Invader's strength, stream strength. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're gonna be here for another 7 hours, Chad. That's the problem. But hey,
only a short 7 hours.
Yeah, some would say that's what allowed the victory here this weekend. However, I don't think that we're gonna be here for that much longer. We've gone over all the important stuff of the lecture, and we're going over the top deck list and trying to see if we can apply those same theory to these lists. And I think so far it's sound. I think we'll do it for the Bears check a little bit. So, as far as consistency tools, what would you consider to be this deck's consistency tools? We have things like Rabbit, things like Smoltuga, things like Ursicle.
Ursicle, yeah. I'm actually cutting down on a Rabbit. I've noticed that Rabbit is the 3rd best turn 1 normal summon after Smoltuga and Ursicle. Like, legitimately, I will open hands that have Smoltuga, Ursicle, and Rabbit, and I'm summoning Ursicle. Unless I already have like an Ursier or a Don't Poke. No, if I have Don't Poke, then I'm normaling the Smoltuga to get the Ursier with a big booty. If I have the Ursier, no Don't Poke, I go Ursicle for the Don't Poke. If you have both, then you go Rabbit. Like, it really is just like depending on what you have. But Rabbit doesn't feel to be as pivotal as it is in other decks. Like, you don't like need it. You have other really good turn 1 normal summons.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and that's I think also really interesting because you said that like stuff like Earth Scout is kind of a consistency piece, but also kind of like you were saying is like the weakest aspect of being like a defender and a recruiter. It's not great. So you're saying you're potentially cutting this card for other things, which is something to consider.
Earth Scout is an offensive card. I find like no one ever swings into it, and like not even in a like they give you an extra turn kind of way. They just like I don't know, like play in a way that makes it so the Earth Scout doesn't fucking matter. Like they'll only ever swing into it when they don't give a shit what it is that you summon afterwards. Which is like problematic, especially like if I was playing into like a Waylands or a Rhinosec deck or something like that, or even like the Sonic or shit, like then Earth Scout becomes really nice with Earth Coat, which is the kind of thing I would have sided into after game one. I don't think you necessarily need a game one. Game one, the main deck is like fine, but then post side, you'd rather have like extra tools for it. Especially when I played against the Sonic or deck that JT was on. Like that deck is terrifying because even the Earth Coat doesn't do shit because they never attack with the Sonic Core.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting too because so we're talking about the power level, some of the strengths of Elestrals. You know, these things aren't the biggest hitters, kind of compensated by the don't poke. But you're also utilizing cards like Eddy and I guess cards like Tsunami kind of facilitate the same type of idea, which is that you're allowing your smaller bodies to get over the big bodies, and then occasionally you have your Abominers that can be like a 7 or a 9. It's like actually pretty terrifying. How was Lavalith as a one of, by the way?
I mean, you know, it's a good card. You're already playing fire, so it's like it feels the same way as Earthquake felt in the Earth deck, where it's like, oh yeah, it's an engine, so it's good, you know?
Yeah.
That card has it definitely won me games. Like I've played against an Earth player round 5, and Lavalith was just absolutely fucking insane against him. I played against a Solar player, and Lavalith was really good in the match that I played against him. Unfortunately, I lost that match. That was my loss in Swiss, was the Solar player. But I think it was entirely on me misplaying. I just played poorly into that matchup.
Yeah. Well, and so funny too. So like you're talking about like different matchups and different types of like deck considerations, or we talked about how this deck is fairly consistent. It's got some pretty good beaters. It's not super great into counter runes, and that's kind of, I guess, the overall weakness of this strategy is that it does need some form of counter rune removal because your guys are pretty important to stick around, and they aren't as effective as MSTs as other decks. But
correct.
It's kind of the double-edged sword with it, and playing around that, I think, effectively is how you were able to, get your top and also get into that top 4 finish.
Well, I'll say it. I found that it really is the only big weakness of this deck. Like it's either if they stick a guy with an 8 stat or more, then you're just like, okay, this is like difficult to deal with, or is the back row. So I'm testing something new. I'm gonna be trying playing Blizzard in this deck because I think like so many, and especially because a lot of people are like cutting back on counter runes a little bit. Like I feel like we're removed from the format, the meta of like 12 to 15 counter runes in every deck. I think people are starting to go down to like 9 or 10, you know? So the amount of times where my opponent just had a back row and I'm like, okay, I have a don't poke set. I'm going to normal this Ursir, and if it resolves, I win the game. But if they have like a relevant back row, I'm not doing anything. It's like if I just have Blizzard there and I wipe that one back row, then I just like it just wins me the game. Like at the cost of 2 spirits, win the game. I'll take it, you know? Yeah,
no, I think that makes sense. And it's interesting. It's like, what would you say this deck's like worst matchups are deck wise? I mean, that's something that what decks are good in the meta right now, I think, are still kind of up in the air. I think we have a somewhat good idea. But what would you say like the Bears is bad into, and what would you say is like good too?
Rhinosect is probably the harder matchup. That and like anything that makes it towers, but I feel like that's the case for every deck. Like the Volt Tempest deck against JT, it was so fucking hard. Like I'm not gonna lie, it was just one of those matchups where I specifically needed to make sure he never stuck a guy, and I just got lucky and had every means of not letting him stick a guy. You know, I had Cryoblast when I needed it, PTA when I needed it, you know, swung over his thing when I needed it because he didn't have any back row, and at that point, like I just built a board that was so wide that he couldn't stick a dude. But Rhinosect is awkward game 1. I think post side, the Rhinosect matchup is actually quite easy. But I think pre-side, it's a difficult matchup specifically because like your Cryoblasts are dead. You can't Cryoblast anything in that deck. And again, the side deck that's on the board on the screen right now is like it's not a real side deck. Like that side deck was like really bad. But I've fine-tuned the side deck. I'm on Argos now, which I think is really good. Like Argo just acting as extra copies of Don't Poke, meaning that your Ursir always connects, always beats over a guy. If they swing into it, you're just blessed. Because it really is, the deck really focuses on tempo a lot. And I think if you put yourself in a position where your opponent gives up tempo on their own board by crashing their guy into your bear that you then get to pump up to make their guy die by battle, I think you swing the tempo so hard on their turn that on your turn, you just like outpace them really hard. And Argo allows you to do something like that with your Ursirs. So it's pretty good.
Yeah, like effectively making it Don't Poke 4/5/6, right? In theory.
Yeah, pretty much. The only, honestly, I'll say it. The Bears deck is really interesting into some of the removal options that are in the game. Like with Earthquake and Resting being limited, a lot of people are on Cryoblast. And you'll look at my list, you'll notice only 2 cards die to Cryoblast. It's exactly Eddie and Ursir, which is fucking annoying because Ursir is like the one guy you don't want to have die. But like, I've noticed some people cut it. Like some people cut it, and like I get it, right? Because like 99% of the time it's like kind of dead. Because like when am I ever sticking an Ursir to the board and not having another guy next to him, you know? Like I get it, it just acts as like a resting on your laurels, but you know, it's specifically only for the Ursir. And I wish Don't Poke could be used at any point, not just the battle phase, because I would love to just chain Don't Poke to Cryoblast and keep my Ursir, bro. I would love that.
That would be insane. Well,
bro, I even had against JT, bro, he activated Race to the Top, target his guy and my Ursir, and I just go, fuck, why is Don't Poke only battle phase? Can you imagine the outplay? I go, Don't Poke, my guy's defense is bigger than yours. Kill your guy, thank you.
See, that's the crazy part. I think at that point, does that make Don't Poke overtuned? Does that make Bears way too strong?
No.
Oh yeah,
I think
of course
the thing
no,
that would
but...
I think the thing that would make Don't Poke overtuned is like what it I still maintain that what it should have done is it should just buff all the bears on your board by +4/+4 until end of turn in battle phase. But I think because it only buffs one, I think it would have been fine to be able to use whatever. But I get it. I understand why it's battle phase only. They wanted us to lose to Equilinks.
That's also fair. Yeah. I mean, hell, Jayak is playing Equilinks in his 5s list, so clearly that's the Bears counter. You did face off against Jayak in the quarterfinals.
In the semis, yeah.
Semis, yeah.
Yeah.
And so how was that into that 5s deck? Because Bears in theory has a good matchup into 5s.
Yeah, Bears is the 5s killer, but Jayak is really good at drawing a counter rune every turn. It really was like that matchup against Jayak was I got 2-0'd very quickly because it literally was he sticks a guy, I go, okay, I have Don't Poke set, normal Ursir, attack, Gorgon's Gaze. Okay, well, fun. Okay, nice. Get Cryoblasted next. He goes, summon a guy, attack. I'm like, okay, sure. Normal Ursir, battle phase, attack, shield. Okay, cool, pass. Next turn, I normal Ursir, attack, or like he's like PTA or whatever, and then I can't walk over his shit because he has like the Mistation in defense or something. I'm not sure. It really just was anytime I played a guy, I just got counter ruined, and I'm just like, okay, not much I can do about it, you know?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. So that's one thing with the Blizzard. I think it's a pretty decent idea. It's a little expensive, of course, and more Frost Spirits you might have to tech in or side deck it at the very least.
That's what I'm doing. I think I'm cutting Astrabbit down to 2, playing a singular Thunder Spirit and going with the extra Frost. If there's a world I cut Astrabbit entirely, but I don't know yet. I think 7 normal summons turn 1 is like really good. Like 7 of the good normal summons. Like Earth Scout is still a good one. I'm on 1 Earth Scout now, 1 Necruff. I want this Moltuga to have a better search target.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Almost, you could have the ability to cut the rabbit altogether by doing what 2 or 3 small Tuga, 2 Blizzard, and cut the Thunder Spirits as a whole. Also a consideration.
Yeah. Right now I've cut the Cryoblast to 2 in the main. I'm on 2 Cryoblast, 2 Blizzard with the 3rd Cryoblast in the side. And the only reason why is because I found that Cryoblast is like I said it in the deck profile today, but I think Cryoblast performed pretty like mediocre in the actual event because I put against a lot of decks that it was either not good into or just completely dead in 2. So I'm just like, if more and more people are playing decks that just like don't care about Cryoblast, I'm going to play less of it and just side the extra copies. So if I do play against a deck that like loses to it, I just like put them in.
That's pretty fair.
Yeah.
What to say? So we've covered the consistency pieces, some of the considerations of the meta and the player themselves. We have this deck is fairly consistent, establishes win condition, and has a win con in the first place. It's pretty important. Elestral removal.
Deck. Yeah.
Not a lot of backer removal, but again, we can supplement that with something like a Blizzard potentially. Is there anything else on this Bears list that you kind of want to go over or kind of discuss? I feel like Bears themselves such an interesting little deck in that as we get more support for Bears in the future, hopefully, this deck is just going to get stronger and stronger.
Yeah, I mean, like really the pivotal card is just Don't Poke. Every other card was made to be insanely fair. And I'll say it, I don't even think Don't Poke is an unfair card. I think Don't Poke is a cool card. And I think it is powerful, but not in an egregious, unfair way. Like, I don't think anyone ever plays against Don't Poke the Bear, like gets Don't Poked or whatever, and goes, just broken ass card or whatever. Like, you know, not the same way like when you get ass rabbited 3 turns in a row and you're just fucking like, okay, I'm so done with this game. Like, Don't Poke is more of like a, yeah, I mean, this one deck is able to utilize an interesting battle trick. Cool, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure.
But that card really, it fixed a lot of the problems the deck had. Don't get me wrong, the deck does still have problems, but that one card really fixed a ton of the problems that the deck had. And it being usable in the battle step versus like most other battle-centric counter runes aren't, means that you don't have to just like waste it to play the game. It's really cool. The card is a really, really, really good design. Whoever came up with Don't Poke the Bear really like knocked it out of the park, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. It's the perfect combination of like, and I think, you know, Hunter puts this in the chat, very powerful and scary, but very fair. And I can kind of agree with that. Again, yeah. Being able to chain at any point in time is like the obvious improvement here, because that would make it maybe a little bit just, I don't know how insane that would make. Again, very, very threading the needle sort of thing. But overall, this was incredible. And this run was also insane. I think we saw what, like 2-3 games on stream of it as well.
Yeah, I played a best of 3 against JT and I won 2-1.
Yeah. So no, I mean,
game 1 I got blown the fuck out. Like, game 1 was not close. He absolutely annihilated me. And then games 2 and 3 was an uphill battle, but I clutched it out.
Yeah. No, I think this is super heads up, and I'm glad we're finally able to release the Bears list. We've been talking about it for months now, so it feels like.
Yeah, if you guys haven't watched the Bear deck profile, chat, I'm really proud of that thumbnail. So if anything, just watch it to let me know that you like the thumbnail. Thank you.
You did a great job on the thumbnails, chat, and I'll absolutely let them know. But what's your take on the top 8 list? Is there anyone particular that you're like I don't know, have a lot of thoughts on? Because I feel like these lists were pretty interesting to me, but I kind of already yapped about a little bit of them.
Dude, I'll say it. I think the Wayland's list is Dymax and Caleb. If you guys are watching, okay, I'm so sorry. I don't think this deck is good. I think this deck is insanely high rolly, and I think to get to top cut, and I might be talking out of my ass, frankly. I haven't tested this. I tested against it, and I found it to be very annoying. But it just feels like, and maybe this is like just an overall opinion feeling that I have about the new format with the new deck list and stuff. Not the deck list, the ban list. It feels like the format is at a point where instead of being a format in which like a removal is king, and if you manage to stick a guy and then stick a second, you kind of like win, because then your opponent can never catch up because you'll just have removal for all their shit. Now that removal is more scarce, it feels like we're in a format where every deck has an auto win button, and they're just speed running to reach that auto win button to get to a point where the opponent is unable to come back. Which, I don't know, you listen to that and it sounds cool, but like in practice, it's not that fun. It's like, instead of being a back and forth game like chess or whatever the hell, it's more so like if everyone just like ignored everything in chess and they just like the win condition was get upon to the other side at all costs and just fucking tunnel vision into that. Like, you know, you don't interact with your opponent a whole lot. You just kind of have your one established big guy or big dude, and then if you stick that to the board, you just like win, because there's like not enough removal to clear stuff, you know? Like, the only reason why I won against Dimax is because I thankfully drew, you know, Lavalith plus double shield and stuff like that. So I got to Lavalith, trade with his Moralith, then he brought it back with Rise. I managed to shield it. Then he goes Catarant. I gaze it so that he doesn't get the heal. And then once he sticks a Waylance again, I shield it, and that's how I won the game. You know, it's like, dude, you just have to be lucky and have all of it, you know? But I agree with the removal like limits and stuff like that. I just think that there needs to be a little bit more in the way of card design to disallow the ability to simply go, I have this auto win button in my deck that is nigh impossible to out, i.e. like a Voltempest or something like that, and just I'm going to speedrun this and not care about anything my opponent does. I just think that's gameplay wise, I don't think it's a good gameplay, you know, loop or whatever.
Yeah, I guess I can see what you mean. I think it's pretty far few and in between so far from what we've kind of noticed about some of the trends. Like, maybe that's we're moving towards that, right? Like, obviously the Frostless are making a big showing with Rhinosect and Cryovern and all these like big turbo bodies, and that was previously checked by the massive amounts of removal. And I guess as things like Crundile, Kerberos, Waylance, and Voltempest become more common, I can definitely see that to be the case. But I don't know. It's really strange. Like, I don't really know to what end that's really true. Solar, I think that can get really scary for, because obviously Solar with Lustragon or Celestlio, they have some pretty big bodies that are really annoying to deal with.
Yeah.
But as far as like the turboing portion of it, I still think the trade-off is that it's very expensive to consider those options, right? Like, Dimax is running like maximum amounts of like Rise from the Ashes, and then like Moraliths, which are not necessarily expensive, but you do have to go down pretty significant spirits to then like get into a position where you're winning. Inside my top 8,
that's why this deck is, in my opinion, that's why this deck is not great. I think the Solar deck is better than this personally, even though like it didn't get any tops or whatever. But I think like you stick a Lustragon, the game is over. I was talking to Trish about it, and Trish was like, "Oh, I'll only play one Lustragon because it's searchable." And I'm like, "Bro, play 2. If you draw it, you just slap it down. It'll feel good." And he's like, "No, it won't feel good to draw." And then he played 2, and then after the tournament, he said, Coder, you were right and wrong. You were right to play more Lustragon, but you were wrong because I actually want to play 3 now. And I'm like, you see? And he's like, oh yeah, I think I'm gonna cut Exaltus, and I'm just gonna play 3 Lustragon, and I'm gonna play Solar Turbo and just draw the Lustragon, like, you know, all that stuff. It's really good. It's really strong. And if you stick a Lustragon, your opponent doesn't out it with, like, what outs the Lustragon? Eddie doesn't out it because it's like a 7/6 or something like that, if I remember the stats correctly. Cryoblast doesn't out it. It's EQ, it's resting, provided that they don't have another guy on board. If they have another guy on board, then resting just doesn't do it. So it's like, okay, please go ahead and normal a guy that is big enough. Like, am I really gonna crash Ursir with Don't Poke? Like, yeah, I would, honestly. That's like the only fucking way that I would do it. But then even there, like, you're putting a lot of resources. At least you get to replace your bear with another bear, but like, it's still not fantastic.
Right. I mean, I think that's I don't know. I think that's also kind of the weird position, is that there are a lot of decks, and clearly the decks that are able to perform, again, like I call it Earth, I call it Solar, I call it Thunder, as having tools to still deal with the big bodies and big guys, outside of like other decks that maybe can't do that. So maybe the question is, a majority of decks don't actually have that native removal that they can actually deal with the strategies. Fire is one that we just have not seen tops from, but people swear up and down is crazy. And I think
it was before Lavalith Limit. Now it's not great.
Right. And it's stuff like that, or it's also things like Kinleo being small enough and being pretty ineffective. It's going to soak up every single counter rune. And so that's something that I think is very maybe interesting to talk about, is that the decks themselves don't have the tools necessary to deal with these cards natively or comfortably as they were before. But even then, I don't know. Maybe we will see a development of Ascension meta or decks that are turboing out the bigger bodies. Thunder is even doing it. We saw Sonicore, we saw Volt Tempest. I'm playing Arcalith. Like, I think that's very true. Will Earth do it? Maybe. I think Earth can do it.
With what? What do you think is a 2-drop?
Right? I don't know. Christbore is like the meme option, but it's like.
Don't get me wrong. I think Christbore is cracked. I think that card is really good.
Yeah,
what is it? 7/6? What's the stats on it? It's like a 7 something.
7/5. It's a 7/5 with.
Yeah, the card's fucked. Like that's so good. It's so strong.
Yeah. Oh wait, I took it out of the list. Anyways, yeah, it's a 7/5, which is pretty good. But overall, like Walking Earthquake is nice. Scavengem is a pretty good option as well. Like if we're looking at the Elestrals with inside of Earth inside of them, like. Someone was playing Cent Harbor, by the way, but not necessarily an Earth strategy. They were playing inside the Pantera strategy.
Yeah.
Which I wish I had that list with me. I think I can go check it. But there was a strategy that was playing effectively Water Nexus with the Poseidon that was playing Pantera and Cent Harbor because they didn't have a third Pantera. And the idea was that you just turbo out these big 3-drops that are super hard to out. 15s is what we were calling it. And 15s. So... But again, I look at that deck and I'm just like, yeah, that's really cool and very high rolly, but is that actually able to like viably, consistently put up results? And maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting deck for sure.
Yeah. Oh, hi Josh.
I think specifically. Hi Josh.
Earth?
Oh, if we're doing this, hold up. We're doing this. I'll do this. Boom.
Yeah, I had to be here for Earth.
Hi, Josh.
How you doing, buddy?
You know, just playing some Elestrals. Or talking Elestrals.
We're talking Elestrals.
Getting myself prepared for another 4 hours.
Oh, I promise you I'm not here for 4 hours.
I can be here for 4 more hours if you want to go.
No, I promise you I'm not here for 4 hours either. I'm tired as hell.
But like on the topic of like, are we getting into an Ascension meta? I'm down. Bears can adapt to it very well. Just Urskot is the response to that, which is really cool. I think the idea that you can like let's say they attack into your Urskot and they're like, okay, I'll take the trade on this. Like I'll don't poke my Urskot to make it a 7 and survive the attack, and then their guy bounces, and then I still have Urskot. Like I'm so down. I will do that any day of the week.
Josh, anything to add?
No, I mean that's completely correct. Sorry.
So, Josh, what's your take on this in this little bubble we had so far, the top 8 tournament?
First off, I wish I could have participated. Hate being sick.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, I fucking adore that you beat 6 people out in a tournament you didn't enter. Fantastic. Good job.
Insane.
It's awesome. It's great. No, I don't know. The fact that Fives still even got second place is still disheartening. It just kind of shows that like the list didn't necessarily do what it needed to do. Obviously, like it made it make different inclusions into the list, but ultimately it just does a different thing now. It just plays more counter runes and it has like more engine slots from what it was playing before. So it just kind of shows to me that it didn't do what it necessarily sought out to do, which was to lower the power level of Fives and heal. And I think heal is still a very real deck that just wasn't explored for this event.
Okay, tell us, what would you have played if you entered this tournament?
I probably would have played Earth, just because it's a safe pick into an unexplored metagame.
Yeah, I agree. I honestly, the only reason I didn't play Earth, because, you know, I would have played Earth rather than play the Bears. Yeah. The only real reason I played the Bears is because I was out in France for like 8 days, 9 days or something like that. And I did not test at all. And that's just the deck that I brought to France to like help teach people how to play. So I was playing with like some friends or whatever, and I was giving them the Earth Nexus deck, and I was like, hey, I'll play you with this Bears deck. And I just had a lot of fun with it, and I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'll continue having some fun. Why not?
Yeah. And, like,
the thing with the Fives deck
about like Fives only having 2 entrants, it's just that, like, I don't think the people like playing the deck.
Well, so that's the big
Like-
thing. I think that the way to stop fives isn't to like ban the cards or limit the cards. I think overall people are just gonna like get really fucking bored of it, and that's why there's only a small handful of people that are playing it. Those people, and I'll say it, and I'm not even trying to beat around the bush. I think anyone that plays that fives deck are people that are throwing fun out the window in a game because they are choosing to try hard and sweat really hard. And like I just think eventually it's like not worth it. I was even telling Jayak, like I'll say it, when Jayak beat me in top 4, the words that came out of my mouth were, when are you going to stop playing this boring ass deck? And then after that, obviously, like, I'm not saying that in the sense of like, oh, Jayak, this is all you play and stuff like that. But it's more so like, I think Jayak's a good player. And I think fives is not a deck that really rewards good players per se. Like, yeah, it rewards good players, but the deck limits the amount of interaction, meaning that a bad player can limit interaction in order to have to win less interactions to win the game, meaning there's a lot less skill expression. I think a player that has good, like a lot of skill like Jayak would probably thrive on a deck that has more interaction. And I think at the end of the day, that's what a lot of people are going to start realizing. I think fives is going to start becoming the de facto, like, less good player deck. It's going to be, you know, Tenpai type stuff in Yu-Gi-Oh! And a lot of the good players, you know, us included, you know, we've kind of shown that we're pivoting away from like playing stuff like that. Like, I don't even know if one of us has played fives in the last like 4 tournaments or something.
I think it did right before the end of Frostfall.
Oh yeah, you
I
did
played
play that
fives
for the
in,
last
like,
Frostfall.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
played Crab.
Yeah,
I
the
played,
crab deck.
I played Crab with like Jatagua and stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, so we played that for like what, a tourney, and then just like immediately we're like, yeah, no, this is boring as shit.
Yeah,
But I think
that was
some of
one that
the-
went 5-0 and dipped.
Yeah. But yeah, I think some of the like higher skill players, and you know, I'm not even like talking about us. There's a lot of really good players out there. I think a lot of the higher skill players either are going to or have already decided to pivot off it and play something that rewards skill a whole lot more. Because I think, especially with how new the game is, I legitimately believe that with how new the game is, I think that the skill gap between the mediocre players, or even like the decent players and the good players, is really, really wide. Like, there's a reason why, regardless of format, regardless of like what decks they're on, that top 8 is almost always the same, like 9 to 12 people. That's always in top 8 of every tournament, is because those players are the ones that have really grasped the game well and are just, you know, leagues beyond anyone else that's running in the tournament.
I don't know how to feel about that particularly. I do think that I agree that there are like consistent things about the top players across the different formats. Obviously, we've talked about a few of those things tonight, but I do think that that will eventually get closed as the game gets more developed.
I agree,
brings in more
100%,
players,
Yeah, 100%,
which
yeah.
so I think that matters like pretty little in the grand scheme of things. It's very
You know,
strange.
that's why I was saying specifically, like, because of how new the game is. Like,
Yeah.
we're just in a point where like there a lot of people have to play catch up. Because like we've been playing the game for what, a year now, and there's a bunch
Oh,
of people
God.
that are like, oh, this is my first or second tournament or something like that, you know.
Fortunately, I think the game is also so close to its, well, so new in its infancy that the catch up that you have to do
It's
isn't
minimal.
super long.
Yeah.
If you put like a good amount of time over like a few weeks, you can get really good really quick.
Oh yeah, especially like, I'll say it, bro. If you're like a Yu-Gi-Oh player coming over to this game, you pick this shit up and you're caught up in 2-3 weeks of testing.
Yeah. True.
Someone in the chat mentioning that they think it's good that you have a deck that requires less brain power, so you won't be spent into the later rounds. Yes, that is fine.
Yes.
Like decks like Tenpai are okay to exist in the game. Decks like Tenpai are not okay to exist in the game if they start taking 60-70% top cut representation or 60-70% of entry. Like, you look at the tournament that Josh won with Earth, where everyone else was on fives. It was what, you were on Earth, one person squeezed with some other deck, and then 6 of the other 8 6 of the other players in top 8 were all the
Yeah,
fives
I think
crab
it was
deck or whatever.
Lexus. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Lexus
a
the
yeah
other one.
yeah it was a water deck. Yeah. But like we had that happen a handful of times where you would just have like a format, and the format that you have is just, you know, oh, fives, or like you would test every deck and you're like, okay, well, these decks are more fun and they have like more interesting like plays that you can make and interesting counterplays to stuff, but fives, you know, like
Yeah, I guess. Like, so the thing I will say about like the limits to fives and people playing fives and boredom and all that stuff is that I don't necessarily know if that's true in terms of like people will get bored of the strategy. I just think in general the risk reward for playing fives now is just so significantly less than it was before, especially because of the removal options. It can't, like, the pacing doesn't feel as complete. It does feel very similar to set 1 fives, which is like good in itself but loses tempo often and is making concessions that are just super weird sometimes. And yeah, it's not the most interesting deck. And it's also, I wouldn't even say the easiest to play. I think the deck also sometimes can present really hard options that aren't very apparent. So it's weird because it's a double edge between like the deck is very straightforward versus like kind of slow or boring. But then two, it's like, yeah, a game where it is the best strategy to play isn't the most exciting game. And I don't know if a lot of players overall are making the wrong decision for making that meta call, but I don't know. I'm glad that we're pivoting away from that in terms of representation. I don't think that even if Jayak did get second place with it, and even if we had 2 people that entered the tournament, I think as a whole, with like a big body beater strategy, I don't really think that's like a significant data set to consider fives alive and well. Right, like I think that Jayak's maybe like an outlier. I think that like fives as a whole it's not dead, it's just different, right?
I think what chat's saying is very interesting. They're saying, I'm gonna say it, we were in an Earth beatdown meta for a long time in comparison to how long fives was on top. So I don't fully agree. There's a lot of nuance here, specifically because I don't think Earth was ever the best deck solely at the top by itself, ever. In base set, first off, I'll say it, in base set, everyone was bitching and moaning and crying about Thunder Nexus being the greatest deck of all time, the unbeatable tier 0, no other deck even comes close. And then we rock up with Earth and we take every webcam tourney with Earth, like just every single one. And then all of a sudden, then it's like, oh, Earth beat down a top tier 0 unbeatable deck and all this stuff. I'll be honest, I think the only reason why that was the case is because I think there were very few people at the time that were attempting to innovate on the game. I think we innovated on the game with that Earth deck, which, to be fair, we didn't like find this deck. It was like known, but I think it was undertested. And I think we kind of forced people to test different things, but I think it was that early in the game, a lot of people weren't really testing a whole lot of viable stuff. They were testing silly stuff and goofy stuff, you know, like the Thunder Bear stuff to be an example and stuff like that. Like, it wasn't a deck that was super viable, but it was a deck that was like interesting and fun. But I think not a lot of people were searching for what are like the competitively viable decks, because I think even pre-ban list, when like they banned Spark It, I think the fives deck, the Crab fives deck, was extremely playable. It was a viable deck. That deck could have existed in that exact same format and would have done well. So I think Earth has consistently shown to be a tier 1 deck, like a top tier deck, but it's never been the sole deck at the top. And I think only in base set, and I think only base set, where it's always taken up like majority of top cut spots after we started winning with it, because everyone was just like, oh, well, then we're just de factoing to this being the best deck, and then not really giving any other deck much thought until, I guess, we and maybe some other more prominent like members of the community gave other decks some thought. You know, that fives deck came out of nowhere. Even the Water Nexus deck came out of nowhere after the Spark It ban. I think both of those decks were viable while Spark It existed. I just think that the Thunder Nexus deck, we were just like, oh no, this deck is way too egregious. I think that was a big issue, is Thunder Nexus was egregious and unfair. But I think the other decks were able to compete 100%, you know?
You also have to think too that we played for how long with base set?
A lot, very long
Like,
time.
We're talking like tournaments are running before first edition even rolled out.
That's true. Yeah.
So there's a much longer time span or a much longer timeline for Earth's like dominant performance over a format that lasted for what, like 6-7 months, which is twice the length of a set legality should be.
Yeah, base set.
So
base
it
set,
felt like a really long time because it was a really long time, but not because there were any new cards being introduced into the game.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
You can't really, a format can warp to an extent, but it can't warp when your card pool is like very limited and nothing new is being added to it, you know?
Yeah, that's the thing. Same thing with like the Frostfall meta too. Like when Frostfall, initially was dropped, everyone was like, and us too included, like more Frost is going to be crazy and it's going to shake up the meta. And it did do a little bit, it didn't quite convert like I think it should have, but there's definitely like a viability there. And again, that's a retrospect thing, but Earth was still extremely strong because again, it didn't lose any tools. It didn't necessarily gain anything crazy, but it didn't lose anything. Thunder arguably got better and was arguably the best deck because of Race the Top, again, more removal natively. And like even with Lavalith and Laurels and Earthquake and all these things except for Cryoblast, I don't know if fives would have been a big threat if people were just playing that strategy a little more straightforward to start, like when Sparkit was still in the game, but it could be. And so yeah, it's like the decks that were good in base set were still good in Frostfall, and the decks in Daybreak are different but kind of still the same. Earth, Thunder, the Frost thing's new, so because they got a lot of new tools, and it's I don't know. I think it's kind of hard to say that Earth has been a extremely bad thing, it's like a bad thing in the game specifically to have as like a dominant deck, because it does kind of showcase too like a lot of the really positive things about Elestrals in terms of its high skill ceiling, in terms of like the nexusing mechanic, like consistency piece, deck building concessions, like all those things are really cool and on full display inside of Earth, and I'd argue inside of Thunder too. But like versus a fives deck, which is I don't think really necessarily like the mission statement behind Elestrals, right, in terms of like some of its core mechanics. So I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, and I also agree that we just didn't really have anything super impactful like Daybreak before. Daybreak does really change a lot about the meta.
Yeah, Daybreak really did a good job at shaking up the meta. And I'm sure the next set, what's it called? Moonrise?
Moonrise, yep.
Moonrise will probably do a good job as well. In my opinion, I think that's like something that's very likely to happen. But no, I think that the format now is just like reached a point where it's a lot more diverse, which is a good thing. But I think the issue is that now decks are just like speedrunning an auto win button that's just hard to out. But we've only had one tournament, so I think the meta still has a lot of developing to do. So I think it's like a thing where you just like ride the wave, see where things go, and figure it out later.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And again, that's fair. What's up, Josh?
So, do we think that Daybreak changed up the meta or the ban list?
I think of both, personally, but
because I don't think that Daybreak really shook up that much. If anything, I think it solidified the dominance of the previously good decks.
Well, okay, so the thing with Daybreak, the issue with Daybreak, right, is that we already had a lot of removal, and then Daybreak said, here's more removal. And then the good decks that already were good were like, yo, more removal, I'll play that. And then they just kept being good, But I think that just like showed, I'll say it, bro. I think base set specifically was severely undertested. A lot of the cards from base set were extremely overtuned, but I think that's like a TCG problem for like every TCG. Like look at LOB, bro. That shit has goddamn Raigeki and Feather Duster. Like, these cards are fucking cracked, man. It was Feather Duster and LOB. It wasn't. No, Raigeki was, but Duster was not.
Raigeki, Dark Hole, Pot of Greed,
Dark Hole, Pot of Greed, Reborn, like
Revealing Light, like
yeah, like all of these cards. You look at all of them, like the classic, DM staple, whatever, bro. These cards are busted, man. Like even to this day, like I don't think anyone, even in 2024, can look at Raigeki and go, that card's mid. Like, I'm sorry, that card's fucked. Like, Raigeki's broken. Free kill every guy your opponent controls. I can't even imagine that existing in Elestrals, you know? But like, stuff like that is just like, you know, base set will have cards that are extremely overtuned and cards that are extremely undertuned. I think they should be a lot more willing to look at cards that are overtuned and go, yeah, this can't keep existing in our game. And by that, I mean a lot of the counter runes that are in the game. I think that we are at a point right now with Elestrals where a lot of the counter runes that are in the game should get squashed and replaced with things that are slightly less powerful. I think Gorgon's Gaze is too strong of a counter rune. I think PTA being like blanket removal on anything is really powerful too. I think Tsunami is one that's like interesting because it requires that you play a specific color. So like, I guess it has like a drawback in that regard, but that card is still really powerful. I just wish that there was a wider variety of counter runes that different deck types would want to utilize. Like, what if there's like 2 or 3 counter runes that like fit really nicely into bears, and then like maybe one overlaps with the Thunder deck, but then the Thunder deck wants to play this 1 or 2 other counter rune or whatever. Just like having a variety of stuff rather than being the same 3 counter runes that win every game, you know?
Yeah, I think they're doing a much better job with that over the course of like the sets. Like a card like Tsunami being like native to water is a good thing. Or like
Yes,
Dense Fog, I think is a fantastic thing. Or
Dense Fog
Follow
is a
the
very
Wisps,
well designed card.
stuff like that. Things that aren't necessarily the most generic thing in the world. But I think like a card like Poison Nectar is fine for what it does, being an Omni rune, right? Like it's not.
Yeah, I just think the one thing to keep in mind here is the fact that sure, they are introducing new counter runes into the game, which is good. However, none of the new counter runes that they're introducing into the game are replacing the old ones. Like I'm sorry, there's no one that's going,
I agree.
I'm going to cut Gorgon's Gaze in order to play Poison Nectar. You know, like no one's doing that. And the
But I
reason
will
why
say
the big
that,
problem it's just, if I may, real quick,
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
I think the big problem specifically is the fact that you can't power creep these counter runes because they're already like, I'm sorry, Gorgon's Gaze is a set 6 card, like that came out in set 1. And like you can't power creep these cards. So if you power creep them, those cards are already busted enough as it is that if you power creep them, then you just get way more busted counter runes that are just going to be more egregious. So like, what do? Do you ban them and force people to play the weaker counter runes? I think that is the thing that should happen down the line. Or like limit them, you know? Like I'll be real. I think if tomorrow they go 1 shield, 1 Gorgon's Gaze, 1 PTA, I'd be down with that. Like you get like the kind of situation where you're like in like GOAT format where you have to play around 1 Ring of Destruction, 1 Mirror Force, 1 shit, I can't think of all the traps that they play that are at 1, but like just like ring and Mirror Force and stuff like that. It's the kind of thing where like, oh, I swung into the shield. Okay, I got hit by shield. I no longer have to play around shield anymore. And then you can like kind of start being a little bit more aggressive as the options that your opponent has to counter you are gone. And then you have to like start thinking about what other counter runes that they might have. And then that's where there's more design space to release more counter runes that do different, more niche stuff. Like I think that the counter runes that are at 1 are the counter runes that are like always good. Like Gorgon's Gaze is never a bad card. Shield is almost never a bad card unless your opponent has exactly Equilinks. PTA, I would argue, is never a bad card. Like that card is just always good. Whereas those would be like at 1, and then the cards that you can play up to 3 copies in the counter runes are cards that are way more situational. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. Maybe it's a meta call of like against the decks in the format, this card is going to be good in these situations and stuff like that. It lends itself a lot more to skill expression and deck building for the players, in my opinion.
Go
ahead. So talking about like the prevalence of like turbo boss tower decks inside of like Elestrals. limiting the counter runes and also change or giving like generic options that are like, you know, analogous to Yu-Gi-Oh, I think doesn't fix that problem, and actually in fact expedites it by making those things much more common, much more harder to deal with, and making those decks like everywhere. So much less like you know, the back and forth chess gameplay. And then
I don't disagree.
And that's like the biggest thing. The second is that like I think the problem is that there are too many cards in the game, even outside the big boss monsters, that can effectively deal and counter the one of random counter runes that ultimately allow for like snowball decks to just snowball on their opponent way earlier than I think inside of like old Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Like and this is like Equilinx is a great example of a card where it's like, oh, did you set your one random shield, and now because of lack of removal, again, this is also in modern context, if we still had maximum removal, etc., I mean, it's different. But the idea would be we'd have to still fine-tune other cards in Elestrals outside of just the counter runes to make it to where the environment to where those counter runes are impactful is still the case. Because if you just limit them or make them 2-ofs, etc., I think you do start to see that the Elestrals start to become way too powerful.
Yeah,
I agree.
Like all of a sudden, Leonite becomes a problem.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I just think the thought that I have is like there should not be a game where none of my attacks connect. Like that just feels like a very egregious situation to be in. Like, how am I going to lose a game of Elestrals without a single one of my attacks not even connecting directly? Not a single one of my attacks connected even on a guy, period. Like, no attack has gone through.
Yeah, the keep away in this game is pretty rough.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
Like, I think if you tailor the back row that you release to be like, because you're saying like it expedites the problem of like 2 drops being a problem or whatever. But what if there was counter runes that are specifically that like beat 2 and 3 drops? Like, what if you have a card like Forced Back, right? Where it's like if your opponent ascends, you can bounce that thing back to the hand on ascension. Like, but you give them back their regular normal summon or some shit like that. I don't know. Like something along those lines where you have counter runes that are more situational and stop the thing that, you know, the that prevents like the auto win button and stuff like that, but that also doesn't, because I'll be real, when you have a game where when none of your attacks connect, that's not fun. You're not having any fun, and it feels like the game is uninteractive in that point. Like, I'm sorry, I normal a guy, shield, oh, okay. Normal a guy, gaze, oh, okay. Normal a guy, shield, oh, okay. That's not interactive. That just feels like, it feels like you're throwing, you know that game that kids play where they throw the ball at the brick wall and then it comes back, and then you just throw the ball back again and it comes back, you throw the ball. That's what it is. That's what you're playing. You're just tossing the ball at the wall. Is ball wall? Yeah, ball wall. There you go. Ball wall, whatever the fuck. You just toss the ball and it came back. It came back. Oh, it came back. And it's like, okay, cool. I'm just gonna keep doing this until I'm extremely bored of doing it. You know what I mean? And then at which point I'm going to put the ball away and never pick it up again, you know?
I think that's fair. It's definitely something that is very prevalent right now inside of Elestrals, is, again, like I call it the keep away, is like that type of, well, and it's true. That's kind of how, again, prime example is in the top 4, like Sky Guy going Eddie to try to out my board. I go shield and just bounce the Eddie back and then take advantage in tempo, and then Eddie again to try to do anything, and then I just shield again, and then it's like, okay, well, now I just snowball and from here. And that's honestly a lot of the Swiss rounds as well, was that decks that can effectively manage that keep away is like just insane inside of this game. And that's been the case forever. I think that's been the case inside of set 1 too. The major differences are between like then and now, I think, are just the fact that we have better Elestrals than we did then. But
yeah, it's weird because I think the removal meta at least let your attacks connect.
That's fair. Well, I mean, because it didn't matter. The text didn't matter anyways, because your guy was gone the next turn. That's the other problem, is that,
like, is there a realistically, I don't know if there's a difference between, and like I guess there kind of is, between me earthquaking my opponent's Celestial and shielding, other than the fact that it's like gone. it just in a different location.
Right.
Right.
Well,
like 12
one you still
removals
have
and
access
12
to, the other you don't, you know, but yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing
I don't know. I
yeah.
You know what I mean,
I just compared a goat format in Yu-Gi-Oh where it's like I cannot think of a single time where I'll play a game of goat or a game of Edison or whatever where an entire game will go by and I will not land a single attack. Like that doesn't happen. I don't think ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My thing is like we're kind of very much back to base set meta, where it's just like who drew more counter runes.
I don't know.
Hand.
I don't know if that's true.
Basically. Yeah. We're not that far. I think there is a little bit more counterplay than there was in base meta, but I think it's still like a pretty egregious situation because like, and I don't know, maybe it's just the deck that I was playing because obviously Bears needs to land attacks to be able to do anything. But there were so many times where my opponent like stuck a guy or two, and then they set a back row, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to attempt to out the board now. No more Ursir with a set don't poke. And I'm like, if this connects, then I get to Ursir over one, and then Ursir over the other, and then I'm chilling. Or Ursir over one, a bomb and Ursir over the other, and I'm okay. And it's like, oh, shield, okay. Like, it just feels like playing into an established Elestral or two while there is a back row and you don't have one, the game ends. Like, the game is just over.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of makes sense. And again, kind of going back to stuff we talked about in the lecture, thanks for missing that. Is that like...
I was there.
No, I'm saying mainly you guys in chat. But like the idea that like, again, that I think goes back into like the card advantage stuff or spirit differential stuff, because like there are cases and times in this game where like activating counter runes is actually disadvantageous, or like that you are just up in cards but you can't do anything with. Like that there's, I think, a lot more nuance than just like attack connect good and I'm not saying that you're saying that either. I think that's also kind of reductive, but the to the point that like that attacking is scary and that, you know, battle is just kind of non-existent already in terms of the game is somewhat there. I mean, it's funny because like the game is very much tempo and very much is timing based, but a lot of that is not taken in combat. I think unfortunately the fives meta and removal meta is like that, but it's kind of hard to argue that that's like better or worse than where we are now, because it's also less interesting, right? Because if combat mattered even at all, then like outside of just a means to do damage, then that means just big beat stick wins still, regardless, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the problem with like with making attacks connect as like a metric of like mattering. In my opinion, is that it just means that large number still wins.
I think that you can just interact with battle a different way than just everything stops an attack.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I agree. Yeah, I think that's partially like it's like a Sakuretsu armor is like kind of I don't know. Tsunami is a good choice. I think Tsunami is a good option to where it's like you are stopping the attack, but you're not really losing advantage per se.
It's still on the field.
Yeah, legit. Give me like shield. Okay, I'll say it. Shield is too good. Give me a counter rune that costs 1 of any color that says when your opponent declares an attack, pay 1, negate the attack. Simple.
Negate attack.
Speedrunning attack. Very basic.
Speedrunning Yu-Gi-Oh's problems. But yeah, I mean, again, it's like the magic, like having a magic cylinder, right? It's like having draining mirror shield. It's like these different cards that interact with battle differently. I think in Elestrals, again, it's the needle thing. It's like when we have to consider those cards, the Elestrals also have to be tuned with that in mind. I think that's kind of unfortunate, because every tool that we'd be giving to decks that would benefit heavily from combat, also we'd be giving to decks that don't necessarily need to benefit off of combat. And that's the balance there, is that like decks that can easily win in the main phase can now still continue to stop and negate and then continue to gain advantage in those main phases. Like that's kind of the unfortunate truth too, is that like decks like Earth and Thunder and etc., they can just stall with those same tools, regardless if it's negate attack, tsunami, or whatever, and then like win without having to go to combat, right? They can just out advantage and outburn and etc. Right? That's kind of the balance there, I think, which is again tough, and it's hard to really parse that out versus like, you know, allowing more attacks to go through, or that having different counter runes to different element types that that are, I don't know, in the game. It's weird. It's very true. I actually think Gorgons is not even really like a big issue. I think Gorgons is very fine. It's
I think
arguably
Gorgons shouldn't stop attacks. Personally, I think that's the only egregious part of the card. Everything else is fine.
No, I think that would. Yeah, I can see why that would be like a more enjoyable experience. But I do think that the ability to use Gorgons as this like all around good card is really interesting. But I do think that pairing Gorgons with things like Shield and Tsunami, and technically PTA, which is also kind of battle stopping, is a problem.
Everything's battle stopping.
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you this. Let's say, hypothetical world, Gorgon's Gaze doesn't exist, Shield doesn't exist, Tsunami doesn't exist. You have a counter rune that says, pay 1 of anything, you do not take damage this turn. Would you play that card?
Waboku.
No, because Waboku protects your guys from battle. This doesn't.
Okay.
It's just no damage this turn.
1 cost, you take no damage?
Correct.
Interesting. I don't know. I don't think so. More often than not, no, because that means that you'd be in a position where multiple Elestrals on board make that card worth it, and thus it's still bad to activate, and also means you're still probably losing anyways, because you can't out advantage your opponent because the snowball in that regard is worse. Yeah, so probably not. No, I would say, like, at least my initial guess, because like that,
No,
it's like Tsunami is effectively the same thing, but also accomplishes something, right?
Yeah, I mean, Tsunami accomplishes that it blanks a battle phase.
Yeah, you take no damage, and also you do its thing. Yeah, so that's kind of weird to like really evaluate. At least my snap judgment of it is that nah, because the position where that's advantageous to activate in the first place is you're already losing.
Yeah,
at least
again,
from what I see.
You're losing in a world where there's no Gaze, no Shield, no Tsunami. So your attack is likely connecting on the crackback. So you can start picking apart the board. Whereas right now in the game, if your opponent has a face down card in that game state, there is a 0% chance of you picking apart the board if that is like any counter rune in the game.
I guess, yeah, that's true. It does become a game of who drew the card though, right? Is it like, will this go through? Yes, no, and it's like maybe that's the gamble of 50-50, but like, yeah, I guess that's kind of fair.
Anyways, it is getting late for me, so I am going to head out. But thank you for the lecture, Swole. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Bear's best deck, and that's all I gotta say.
Always has been.
Always has been.
Good night, everyone. I'm gonna head out. Bye. Everyone like the stream.
Oh,
thank you, and subscribe to the channel. Lol.
Road to 3K.
Road to 3K. Absolutely. Well, yeah, and I would love to also stay on for another couple hours. I've had like 500 calories to eat today, and also I'm dead tired. But Josh, do you have any notes or anything then parting wisdom upon the chat?
Listen to Professor Swalex. A lot of the things that he said in the first half of the stream were very correct. I think I've said this a bunch on previous Professor Swalex streams, but play different stuff, please. It will make you so much better at this game.
It'll make you a more well-rounded player.
Well, that, and like, you just won't be surprised at anything you see in a tournament either. And a lot of the things that I see, and from what I hear in tournament reports from people, is that a lot of the matchups, their opponent just didn't know what to do. So, like, Bears, for instance. Practice playing against it. The deck is real. And I would assume, especially after like the recent success of Bears, that more people give it a shot and maybe play it in tournaments, even just for fun. But you need to know what those cards do, and what Don't Poke does, and how to play around it, and how to beat Don't Poke. but that goes for everything. Like with the rise of Old Tempest again, does your deck have outs to these things? Look at the tournament report from this past weekend, and it will give you a good idea of what you should be give you a good idea of what you should be preparing for the next event and events to come, and whether or not that your deck that you're thinking about playing, or even your pet deck, is going to be up to par with what the rest of the field is bringing. So play other stuff, look at your deck's faults, and capitalize on ways to make them not have those anymore.
Yep. I think that sums up effectively most of the stuff in this PowerPoint perfectly, which is incredible. But
so, and yeah, and when Clash comes out, obviously it'll be a bajillion times easier to jam games with people. I know a lot of people, we talk about, just like play more games, and not necessarily everybody has access to a consistent group of people to play games with. Even necessarily within like the Elestral server, it's hard to get like a testing circle together. It's nice that even with like the knots, and like we have a server of people that like we consistently like practice with and whatnot. And I think that a resource like that has been, I can't even put a value on that, because I don't know how I would test if I didn't have a core group of friends to practice in and get better along with me, right? So if you are looking to even get better in that aspect, like find a good group of people that share the same goals with you. And maybe that's not even necessarily winning a tournament, but if your goal is to take a specific deck and do as well with it as possible, getting more eyes and more games in, and with people that share the same type of game values as you, is also extremely valuable.
I agree. I think that's all. The community aspect of this is pretty important, and so that's all. Like, it's all going to change with Clash too, in terms of how people will be playing and who's going to be playing. And that's also really exciting. It's like what does Clash really mean for Elestral space, and who are we going to see dominate like the Clash app versus like the webcam tournaments, and that's or even just the regular tournaments in general. I think that's crazy. So yeah, no, I think that's all very well said. So, well, Josh,
that's all I got.
Thank you for joining me on today for my being a short guest lecture as well. I'm happy this stream, while I'm sad it's not 7 hours long, I also didn't really necessarily mean it to be 3 hours. So we still accomplished our goal of a short stream.
Yeah, 5-minute coding adventure, 5-minute Elestrals adventure.
In and out, no problem.
3.5 hours in and out.
I mean, my whole Elestrals career in itself was like, I'll give it a shot. No, I'll just dip my toes into it and try it. And meanwhile, here we are. Quick 1 weekend adventure in and out a year ago.
Yep. Still going.
Still
waiting for
this is a very long weekend.
The Elestrals adventure to be done.
True. Or not. It depends. But either way.
True.
All right. Thank you, Josh.
Chat, if you have not subscribed to the channel, we are on our way to 3K. Help us get there.
Absolutely.
And honestly, the fact that we're even close to 3K, I think we just celebrated 2.5.
Is wild.
Like, it's been unbelievable. So if you're not subscribed, help us get there, and watch the bear profile that we posted today.
Hell yeah. Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining me, Josh. I'm gonna sign off on stream, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. Peace.
All right. Peace. Have a good night.
You too.
All right, chat. It's just you and me now. So let's recap. So this is how to win at Elestrals. I'm Professor Solax. I used to be someone, and I have experienced loss, and that things get better. I'll tell you that. Current Elestrals champion. Oh my god. As well as talking about the mindset of going into being an Elestrals champion or a champion as a whole. Can you do this? You have to ask yourself that first question first and foremost. And to me, you have this. But even if you don't, that's perfectly okay. I believe in you. All right, so you've chosen to do it. First things first, and something that you're going to do is start to be a little more mindful about your Elestrals decisions and picking a top tier. Again, it's just a practice on getting a little bit more considerate about what you're doing. Think about your deck choices, your cards in your deck, and your current meta inside the current meta that you are playing in. Again, the context is big. Analyze the games. Josh was talking about this a little bit ago. Analyze your meta. Really think about what you're doing. Consider your deck's strengths and weaknesses, the card pool available to you. How easy is that deck to play? As well, spirit math, general considerations for rune removal, and specifically how these cards are tailored to or play against other strategies. This will come with time, but you will get it, trust me. We did some basic card evaluations. Again, there'll be notes on this inside of the online course. Ask yourself questions while playing and before you play Elestrals. Really important thing to do, as you need to keep these things in mind at most times. That way you can put yourself into advantageous positions to win and checkmate your opponent. Speaking of chess and the chess gameplay. Now, you will be going over the Elestral cycle, and like I said, the top portion, 3/4 of this entire thing, this entire process, is thinking. It's mental. And it is mental. It is crazy. You will lose in this process a lot. But don't get too down on yourself. First step in losing this is understanding why you lost and really trying to break down why that is. You know, respecting your opponent is huge in this as well, and not trying to say that they are just sacking you. It's not always RNG. Take agency and responsibility for that. And eventually you'll win. You'll get there. It's not necessarily time over practice, but it is a little more effective practice equals results. And you'll start to understand and analyze your own wins at that point. Again, respecting your own play and making sure that you are being the best you can. Now, one thing that's a little more mental and a little bit harder, a little more higher concept, is winning and losing, assigning value to losses and to wins. This is your dad talking. Is that you're gonna want to try to avoid those subjective thoughts and think a little more objectively about your plays and your positions. Again, you live in the context in which you live in. But it's okay to feel. You're gonna feel bad. You're gonna feel good. The planet is dying. The animals are leaving us. But that's okay. Because do we really need anyone else? And most importantly, you gotta stay humble along the way. Learn when to boost your ego, and most importantly, when to shed it. That way you can understand and not get delusional in your own skill. But that's a little bit harsher way of just saying, be cool. And everything's okay. And it will be too. All right. That's all I have today for the lecture and for the deck breakdown of this past tournament. I think there's a lot to go over and a lot to talk about. I'm glad we got to share some of the lists that did top this weekend. And of course, congratulations to everyone that's at the top 8. And I really appreciate the staff from Elestrals for being so great. Thank you to everyone here tonight that's been popping in and out of chat and for hanging out with me today, keeping me sane. I do really appreciate that. It's always a great time to see everyone and to do this. Let's see if I have anything else. I don't really think so. If it's late for you, then enjoy the rest of your night or get some sleep. As well, if it's early or if it's in the middle of the afternoon, wherever it is in the world where you are, enjoy the rest of your day, evening, night, or morning. Eat something, take care of yourself first and foremost. I'm going to, again, like I said, I've had like maybe as little to eat as possible, and that's not on purpose. But, and that being said, I will see you guys later. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Again, we are so close to the 3K. Follow me on Twitter at Swolax and the Elestronauts at the Elestronauts on Twitter as well to see whenever we go live and deck profiles, etc. Some couple more coming out in the coming days, so do keep an eye on that. But yeah, that's all I gotta say. Thank you guys so much for being here. I do really appreciate each and every one of you, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.